Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I was 19 years old and the only female working at a shop specializing in automotive batteries and things of that nature. I had been working there long enough to realize that most of the clients were male and oftentimes made for some awkward situations. For instance, I would get talked down to and patronized quite a bit or flirted with to the point where I would be somewhat uncomfortable. However, this never really bothered me. One day during a particular busy rush, a very tall man who was maybe in his mid-30s came through my line. This guy had some very strange energy. He seemed a little off. However, it was my job to be professional and assist whoever came through my line. I brushed aside the uneasy feelings. I just wanted to ring this guy out and getting through the rest of the line that was now trailing out the front door. I greeted him and talked to him as I would any other customer while I was processing his transaction. Things were going fine until he realized I was almost done. He started stalling, making up weird excuses as to why he couldn't use certain credit cards, how he needed me to put his battery on hold and he would be back, etc. I told him that I would hold it for him and that he could come back whenever he found the time. I figured he would leave at that point, but he just stood there and just stared at me. Now that I think about it, he was more staring through me than at me. I was a bit uneasy but kept my polite, professional demeanor. "Sir, if you're not purchasing anything at the moment, may I ask that you step aside so I can assist the other customers," I said. He completely disregarded my question and, in a slow, raspy voice, asked, "So, what's your name?" I didn't wear a name tag specifically for reasons like this. Customers had found me on Facebook before and it was really unsettling. Thinking quickly, I threw up my nickname. "It's Rhea." "Rhea," he said as he kept staring. I just smiled awkwardly and said, "Yep, that's me." By this point, my manager had realized what was going on and he proceeded to ask the man to step aside as well. After hearing it from my manager, the man walked to a corner of the store by some shelving and continued to stare while I was ringing the rest of the customers out. A bit of time went by and the line had cleared up, but he was still standing there, staring and now smiling the most sickening smile I think I've ever seen. It made my skin crawl. Of course, my manager and coworker saw this too, and my coworker grabbed my arm and said, "Come on, let's go out back." As we were walking to the stockroom, my manager asked the man if there was anything else he needed. The man muttered that there wasn't and left. I wish that was the end of it, but of course he had to come back in to purchase the battery. When he came back the next day, we again had a line. He let people go ahead of him and waited until I was free before coming up to the counter to make his purchase. I greeted him again and tried to remain professional, but it was hard considering how creeped out I was. I was again met with the same stare and the same freaky smile. I can't remember the entire conversation, but at one point, the questions he was asking became personal / weird / inappropriate enough for my coworker to cut in. He looked at the guy and then at me and said, "Rhea, go take your break," before he basically pushed me out the way of the computer and rang the guy out. I stayed in the back until my manager came and got me, telling me it was safe to come out. We were all pretty creeped out but thought that was the end of it. A few days went by and we had all mostly forgotten about this creepy dude until he walked in again. This time though, he didn't look through the store, didn't approach the counter, didn't say a word to anyone. He just stood, jacked hood pulled over his head, in the corner of the store, staring and smiling. The smile had become even wider and more sinister looking, and at this point I started to freak out. I started shaking and feeling sick to my stomach. Then my manager cut the horrible tension by pretty much screaming at the guy, "Hey, I'm sick of you coming into my store and pulling this crap." The creep paid him no mind and kept right on staring. This pissed my manager off and he walked out from around the counter and told the dude, "Look man, if you don't quit coming in here and staring at her, I will not hesitate to call the cops. What you're doing is harassment, so you need to get out of my store." At the mention of police, this dude's smile dropped and he slowly sauntered out of the store. We never saw him again, but I was immediately taken off closing shifts due to fear that the man would come back and try to catch me when I was alone. About 3 years ago, I was in a long-distance relationship with a younger man, meaning he was only 17 at the time while I turned 19 in the relationship. His name is Peter. Peter was not a nice person to say the least. He thought that the first impressions he made on people were the only one he needed, and as such he stopped being nice, polite, or reasonable to people after the first meeting. I was young and saw past this, thinking I could somehow change him. However, this abuse towards people around me and myself eventually became too much and I broke off the relationship with him. The breakup went smoothly, all things considered, except he wanted me to say the words so he could play the victim. This had been a core element of our fighting because he hinted that he would wanted to break up, but instead of just saying it, he kept me on the hook and became even more abusive. I'm getting sidetracked, but the point was that I thought of the matter as resolved and entered a loving relationship with my current boyfriend shortly after this. Then came the day where Peter wanted to get his belongings back. I texted him a list of everything he had left in my apartment and he okayed it that it was everything. We also made an appointment for him to stop by my apartment around 3 p.m. the following Thursday. I have no intentions of letting him get back into my house nor being alone with him, since he suddenly seems to have many mood swings after seeing me in another relationship. He has been blocked from my Facebook account, but somehow knew I was in a new relationship, which was a major red flag to me and my boyfriend. Thursday came and I felt eager just to be done with it. My boyfriend and I are walking home from high school when my phone rings. It's Peter. He yells at me that he has now been waiting at the train station for over an hour. I try to reason with him, agree to meet him there with his belongings since he needs to catch a train. My boyfriend walks with me to the train station, but we arrive only to find it vacant. I live in a small town and the train station is mostly used during rush hours in the morning and evening. It is also located rather bizarrely among normal residences, and there are a lot of off alleyways leading all over town from there. I get a text stating that Peter can see us, but won't come out of hiding when my boyfriend is there. We leave his stuff on a bench at the train station, calmly replying that I'm not actually interested in meeting him. When I say calmly, I mean that my reply is calm. I'm shaking and my boyfriend is furious over this child's play. On our way home, I receive another text. This time, he states that he has a gift for me and it is in my mailbox. This freaks us out even more, mostly because this indicates that he might be waiting at my home. It is entirely possible that he watched us on the train station and then ran all the way to my apartment. However, there is no trace of him and nothing except a bill in my mailbox. By now, we figure that he is acting out of spite and proceeds to ignore the bombardment of texts, calls, and so forth that follows that day. After a while, life returns to normal. Then I get another call, this time from my ex-elder brother who is worried about his sibling. Apparently he has disappeared, taking one of his brother's gas pistols. I am speechless, but since I haven't seen anything, I shake it off as another childish act. The same day my boyfriend sees police officers walking around the basement staircase on the exterior of the house we lived in, while doing some grocery shopping. He did this every day around 4 p.m. The next day we are contacted by my boyfriend's mother. In the newspaper, there is a description of an unnamed young man from the same town as Peter, who has been arrested for attempted robbery of the pizza place I lived above. He was armed with a knife, a gas pistol, and lighter fluid, while stating that he was not attempting a robbery but was there to visit his ex, presumably me. Contacting the police, I discovered that he also had a mask, fake papers, and a wig in a duffel bag, which he had thrown down in the staircase when, around 4 p.m., he had jumped a fence and tried to enter the pizza place. This means that my boyfriend went out our front door, while my ex was hiding right beside the front door armed. I have never been that freaked out before. The sad truth is that my ex never got charged with anything because he is a minor, has a father with a military background and money. Luckily after this, me nor my boyfriend ever saw him again. So this happened when I was in 7th grade, a 12-year-old kid. At the time, it was just my mom, my brother, and I living in a rental in a rundown low-income area. We moved in during the summer before the school year started, and we were welcomed by our next-door neighbors, which wasn't too uncommon, but not super common at the same time for that area in Oregon. My mom worked 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day, so my little brother and I would ride the bus home every day from school. My cousin would also sometime ride back to my house with us, and her parents would pick her up later. Important for later. One day when I came home, I noticed our small laptop we owned was gone off the counter. I figured my mom had moved it. Later when my mom came home later, we determined it was missing and that a lot of other things were missing like my iPod and wallet and my mom's safe with her handgun in it, and lots of family valuables. We called the cops and reported a robbery and they came to investigate. They determined the person probably slid through the doggy door leading into the garage and then entered the house through our unlocked garage door. Cops stayed in their cars on the curb all night and said they would stay on watch for our house more than normal. I was terrified all night and my brother and I slept in my mom's room. The next day we locked all our doors. It was Wednesday and it was a random half day at my school, so I rode the bus home around noon and my cousin came with while my brother went to a friend's house for the afternoon to hang out. I used the key under the mat my mom leaves for me, and my cousin and I hung out for about an hour or two until her mom came and picked her up. After she left, I hear the doorknob of the closet right next to the front door slowly open, and out comes this skinny, what looked like a 35-year-old man that I recognized as our next door neighbor. He seemed to be constantly shaking, intense eyes, had a really unhealthy look to him because of the extremely sunken face. Terrified, I'm in the living room just standing looking at him while he looks at me, with a surprised look on his face. I think he thought everyone left when my cousin did, until his face changed to an amused smirk when I believed he realized that I was alone in his house. He begins to walk towards me while I stand there shocked, not sure what to do. He grabs me really hard on the shoulders. He seemed crazy and excitable with his intense eyes. I instinctively jump and buckle my knees to allow my full weight to be the force that rips me from his grip and fall down. He then bends down for me when I heel kick him as hard as I can. He then yells and falls to his knees. I use that time to run past him to my front door. I open it and run to a kid I rode the bus with's house about 6 houses down. He and his mom were there and she called the cops and my mom while I waited. The cops got to the house and he wasn't there but had managed to steal a few more small valuables. I gave my testimony that it was our next door neighbor, and he was later caught the same day selling some of our stuff at the pawn shop in town. He ended up being a crystal meth addict, stealing our stuff to sell and pay for his addiction. He was super weak from all the drug abuse, which is probably why I was able to get away from him. He also was apparently somewhat high when he spontaneously decided to attack me, being that I was alone. He had apparently watched us for a few months, learning our schedules from when we left and got home. He took the time to take the key from under the front door mat while we were gone, get a copy, and then put the original back under the mat for my brother and I to use when we got home. The cops were surprised he was smart enough to do that, as he seemed to be mostly dim-witted with everything else due to the drug abuse. Either way, I testified against his physical attack, and he got a few decades of jail time, being that he was already on parole for drugs. I was terrified and slept in my mom's room for the next year. About 25 years ago, when I was in middle school, 7th grade, I had a real bad problem with bullies. I couldn't handle the ridiculing I took while riding the school bus, so I started walking 3 miles to and from school every day. The path I walked was pretty safe, mostly on a sidewalk and always on a busy road, with the last 2.5 miles being a straight shot directly to the school. Back then, there wasn't a stigma attached to kids being outside on their own, so this wasn't deemed unsafe or noticed by anyone, or so I thought. I lived alone with my father, parents being divorced, and my mother saw me on weekends. He didn't see any harm in the walking, and my mother wasn't aware of the bullying or the walking. I did not want her to know, so I continued unimpeded for over half the school year. Now, I wasn't really an active kid, and I sure didn't like having to walk 6 miles every school day, so I assumed this was the motivation for the error I was about to make. One day on the way home, a car pulled up on the shoulder and stopped, about 100 feet ahead of me. That car looks familiar. Hey, it's my father. He's gonna drive me the rest of the way. I started to jog up to the car, seeing him in the driver's seat waiting patiently. His hair looks darker than normal today. Wasn't the inside of his car tan and not red? The thoughts left as soon as they entered, and I caught up to the car and opened the passenger side door and started to get in. As I was tossing my backpack on the floor in front of me and swinging my legs into the car, I started saying, "Thanks, Dad," but the sentence never completed. Before I knew it, I had shut the car door and we began to move. This isn't my father. This man was much older, by at least 20 years, hair obviously dyed black, and hands propped at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. The shirt he was wearing looked just like one my father would have worn. A short-sleeved collared button-down, brick red with black horizontal lines, not pressed, but not too wrinkled either. He was smiling at me, which probably would have felt warm if it was coming from my grandfather, but instead it felt menacing. I heard a click and looked over at the door, which had just been locked. I stared at the door for a moment longer, then turned and faced front and completely froze, terrified. "Hello, I saw you walking. I figured I'd come give you a lift." I did not move or answer. His voice matched his smile, deceivingly friendly. We were roughly a mile away from home, and half a mile from the next turn needed to head in that direction. All I could concentrate on is how I was going to get out of the situation. "Are you on your way home?" This snapped me a little out of my zone. "Yes, I want to go home," I answered. "Stay calm, talk normally, don't act scared." "Where is your house?" "I can take you there." Feeling just slightly relieved, I told him to take the next right turn. I felt myself begin to breathe, and I realized how tense I had been. My body relaxed slightly, and I finally moved and wrapped my hands around my backpack straps. We started to come up on the intersection, and I pointed ahead, reiterating that this was my turn. "Okay, but if you want, we could take a ride instead." It sounded like a question, but it didn't feel like one. The dotted line for the turn lane had begun, but he did not get over. Instantly, I tensed back up, and my grip and my gaze on the backpack straps tightened. Through strained muscles, I choked out that, no, I really need to get back home. He swung the car into the turn lane and began to make the turn. Wide-eyed, I glanced up and verified that yes, indeed, we were making the turn. "Are you sure? I'll make sure you get home before anyone realizes you're gone." Grip tightening further, I abruptly stated that no, I need to get home now. My father's expecting me home now. He's waiting. I just hoped it sounded more convincing than it sounded to me. We completed the turn. Sigh. "Okay, maybe next time, we can meet at the same place tomorrow?" "Yeah, tomorrow's good. I just need to get home today, now." My eyes were firmly trained on the road ahead of us, hoping that if I just focused on the direction to home, I would get there. The turn into my neighborhood was approaching, and I informed him, again pointing towards the direction home. The next few moments were silent. As we came upon the turn, I reminded him, and to my slight surprise and incredible relief, he made the turn. For the first time, I had more hope than doubt. My old neighborhood consisted of mainly apartments, but in the back were a block of townhouses, which is where I lived. If you were unaware of the layout of the complex, the townhouses might go unnoticed. Right before we got to the area where I lived, I told him here, stop here. He pulled over to the side of the road in front of an apartment building. He unlocked the door and I hurried out of the car, backpack still in hand. I began to close the car door behind me. "See you here tomorrow, same time?" I paused for just a second and risked another look at the man. Still smiling, still terrifying. "Yes, tomorrow, see you later." I finished closing the door and hurried off. I swung my backpack on the right way and briskly walked into the opposite direction of my house. I could hear the car still idling behind me, and it wasn't until I was able to turn off that road and leave his view that I heard him start to move. He had to drive up to where I was walking to turn around, and I glanced back as he was making an awkward turn, instead of going around the block to leave. He caught my gaze and gave a slight wave before driving off. My hand was in the reluctant process of waving back, but I was slow enough that he was gone before I completed the motion. I turned my head and kept walking, and the moment I could no longer hear his car, I ran, as fast as my legs and heavy backpack would let me. I ran around to where I could hide between two buildings, and hid there for a while, until I felt enough time had passed for me to feel confident he was not driving around waiting looking for me. It was probably 30 minutes, but it felt like hours to me at the time. I ran the rest of the way home, keeping a lookout, making sure he couldn't see me going through the backyards. I reached my front door, unlocked it, and almost spilled inside. I was moving so fast. It wasn't until I locked the door behind me that I felt safe. I didn't feel scared anymore. I was home. In the end, I told both my parents, and my mother forced my father to drive and pick me up from school for the remainder of the school year. And luckily for me, the bullying stopped the next year. My father didn't believe me and thought I made up the story to get out of walking to school. In his defense, me trying to explain that, no, the car was exactly like yours, except the entire color of the inside, and no, he did look like you, just with darker hair, and it all happened so fast. It was worth his disbelief and annoyance every day in the car, so I never had to meet that guy again. So this happened when I was 16, visiting my grandma, who lives in a small town in Poland. Just for context, it was summer and my family wasn't with me at the time. As you can imagine, living without my parents for a short time, my grandma's really chill was a dream. I could stay out late as much as I wanted to without my parents being able to prove it. Now at 16, you feel you're invincible. You don't really think about how many screwed up people there are in this world. Because of this mindset, I wasn't worried about walking alone at night. The day on which the story takes place was very hot. I remember shopping and hanging out with my friends until about 8 p.m. when it started to rain. Instead of walking home quickly, I decided to visit my aunt's house, hang out with my cousin for a bit, and walk home when the rain stopped. Well, I lost track of time and ended up leaving her house at about 10:30 p.m. At this point, the rain had mostly stopped, and this being my favorite type of weather, I declined my aunt's offer to drive me back, telling her I was getting a cab. I'm still surprised she believed this, but maybe she just didn't care. So I went on my way, called my grandma to tell her I'd be home in 30 minutes, but not telling her that I was walking alone. If there was one thing that scared me, it were the huge train tracks which you had to cross in order to get to my grandma's house the fastest. So I decided to take the longer way around through some sort of nature preserve. I'm not sure how to call it. I enjoyed my walk through the light rain until the long metal bridge came into my view. Just as its beginning, I saw a man. It was a small, quiet town, so it wasn't common for the people here to be out this late, but I wasn't scared immediately. I only saw his back, but he looked like every other guy you'd pass by on the street. He didn't seem to notice me, and I didn't really care. I got distracted by looking at the trees to my left, but when I came to the beginning of the bridge, the man was nowhere to be seen. I suddenly stopped dead in my tracks and got an ominous feeling. This man couldn't have already been out of view. It would have been impossible for him to move this fast. He would have had to run, and I definitely would have heard him running on the metal bridge. At the end of the bridge, there was a small path that led under it, which was hidden by thick bushes. I got even more scared by the thought that he was hiding there, waiting for me. I slowly started to walk backwards, not taking my eyes off the bushes. I hid behind a tree and decided to wait a few minutes to see if he was hiding there. After about 10 minutes, my biggest fear came true. Suddenly, the man emerged from the bushes, looking in my direction. He was holding something big and shiny. I could make out in the dark that it was a knife. My mind started racing with 1,000 questions. How did he see me? Why didn't I see the knife before? Where was he hiding it? He suddenly started to run in my direction, so fast. He ran straight past me, hiding behind this tree, and I was so relieved. When he was out of sight, I ran faster than I ever ran, not stopping to look behind me, being frightened the whole way back, thinking that he'd somehow find me and do whatever sick thing he had in mind. Luckily, I arrived home safely, my grandma waiting for me already mad. Looking back, this was one of the most stupidest things I could have done because of what happened a month after this incident. 2 teenage girls about my age were stabbed dozens of times by this bridge. One body was found about 30 meters from it, and the other one was thrown into the nearby river. To this day, nobody knows who did it, but I'm pretty sure that it was the same man whom I've encountered. For context, this took place when I was 16 years old. I'm 24 now, so it's been a while, but this was one of the many stupid things I've done in my life where I could have ended up dead or even worse. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and me and my friends would often go to the Lloyd Center to go shopping or just to hang around the food court being degenerates. I was walking around the mall with my friend Crystal and my mom when a man at a pop-up kiosk stopped us. He said that he represented a modeling company and wanted to talk to us about modeling for their clothing line. I considered myself better looking than the average duck. Spoiler alert, I am about as plain Jane as they come, and so I promptly announced that I wanted to sign up for the modeling agency. which my mom quickly shut down. I replied with a why, which got me in trouble later down the line with both parents, but that was the only start of my woes. I convinced my mom to allow me and Crystal to go off on our own, and with a reluctant sigh, she allowed us to go off. Me, being the dumb kid I was, marched right back over to the modeling agent and signed myself up with a phone number and email address. He said that he would be back in contact with me shortly to set up an interview with the company. That night, I went home and saw that I had a friend request from someone that shared no mutual friends with me. Hesitantly, I added the person and a message popped up. Hi, I'm such and such from the modeling company. You signed up with our agent earlier today and I wanted to get in touch with you. I know you're in the Portland area, so we wanted to set up an interview with you next week at 9 p.m. at this location. Are you able to come speak to us? I responded with a maybe and logged off my computer. That's when my phone started to ring. I picked it up and it was yet another guy from the agency. This new agent asked me whether or not I could come and do the interview. I said maybe and bid him farewell. It was about here that my gut instinct started to kick in. Why would they set up an interview so late at night? And I googled the address and it was in an industrial park by the airport. I chose not to answer the onslaught of emails, Facebook messages, and phone calls that I was getting. This went on for about a week before I got radio silence. The guy on my Facebook blocked me. There were no more emails or calls. It was at this point I began to worry. What if I had allowed my career to not even blossom, let alone flourish? What if I had made a mistake? I was already in hot water with my father for telling my mom off at the mall the first time. So with school in my mind, I allowed the idea to fade from my mind of what could have been. About 2 weeks later, our home phone started to ring. My father answered the phone, and as soon as he started listening to the message, his face became ash and he instantly hung up the phone, turning me to demand what I had done. I tried to feign innocence, but I knew the jig was up. We had just gotten a phone call from the Portland Police Department to warn our family about a ring of traffickers who were targeting young girls with promises of modeling and acting. They had stumbled upon the name of one of the men who worked for the ring and through that started contacting families of young women whose information they had gotten a hold of. The worst part of it all, they had my family's address and home phone number as well. I was grounded for the rest of the year, which was to be expected, but it was better than being carted off to some trafficking ring, so I couldn't complain. When I was finally allowed back to the mall with my friends, we walked by the kiosk where the modeling agent once peddled his false hopes and dreams. All that was left was an empty booth. This happened about 4 years ago. I had just graduated from high school and was a month and a half into summer break. Needing money for college, I began working full-time for the school district I had just graduated from. Due to a music festival I wanted to attend as well as monetary concerns, I did not go with my family to North Carolina, which was fine by me. What 18-year-old doesn't want a house to themselves for a week? Furthermore, my parents' house is out in the country, so I had little to no fear about my neighbors complaining about parties or being bothered in any way whatsoever. But I was wrong. I often take the back roads home from my friend's house, but on that night I decided I wanted some McDonald's, so I took the main drag and came home on a different route. This way takes you past a mechanic shop not a mile away from our cul-de-sac. It was between midnight and 1 a.m. and as I passed the mechanic shop I noticed the car's lights turning on, or should I say light, for this car had only one headlight working. I remember thinking that it was strange that this car all of a sudden turned its lights on as I was passing, and began to become even more concerned when it pulled out behind me. But I tend to be paranoid by nature, nothing serious, but I always question if the person behind me is following me and whether they mean me harm, so I brushed this off as an unfortunate coincidence. But as I neared my street and the car was still tailing me, I started to become freaked out. I looked at my gas tank and my heart sunk as I saw I was on E. Either I pull up my street and go home, or I risk driving around some and seeing if this dude follows. Yet that option held the risk of my car running out of gas and leaving me stranded on the road, and I figured I'd rather take my chances on my own soil than on the side of some dark and lonely country back road. So I turned onto my street only to have my heart sink when the one headlamped car makes the turn right behind me. At this point I know I'm screwed. With nothing left to do, I began pulling up my driveway. It's a hill about 100 yards long. To my utter horror, they began to follow me up. Looking back, I should have called the cops, but there was no love lost between law enforcement and myself, and at the time, I was too caught up to even consider calling them. If my family would have been home, this would have never happened. I could have called my dad and he could have grabbed his gun, but he, along with the rest of my family, were gone, 12 hours away at the beach. So when they began to drive up my driveway after me, I stopped to put my car in reverse. They responded by reversing as well, yet they stopped at the bottom, effectively blocking my driveway. At this point, I pulled forward again only to have the same jig and dance happen. They followed, I reversed, they reversed, and sat at the end, blocking my escape. I quickly pulled up and turned my car around to come at them head on. By this time they were halfway up my driveway, the furthest they had come up. Looking back, I was terrified, alone, and angry. Who did this person think they were? With my brights on and shining right into their face, I opened my car door and got out. I pulled out my pocket knife and held it in my left hand while I grabbed my hammer in my right. I used to keep one in between my sear and door. In some weird desperate mindset, I made a split-second decision to grab the hammer from the head with the handle sticking out. My hope was that it would be mistaken as a gun. I began yelling and pointing my hammer/gun at the car, screaming at them to get out and what do you want? All the while I held my hammer as a gun and prayed they would fall for it. Whether they did or not, I cannot say. Part of me believes they thought it was a gun due to my brights being behind me, making my whole front side a shadow, yet they could have just not wanted a fight. Perhaps they thought I was a girl or was timid and wouldn't resist so aggressively and violently. Who knows, but it worked. They slowly backed out of my driveway and crept around the cul-de-sac. As they were leaving my street, I ran after them, hiding behind my neighbors' houses, and at every driveway the car would slow down to a near stop, as if scoping out the houses. Thankfully, they didn't pull into any driveways and they turned off my street altogether. After I was safely in my house, I ate my McDonald's by the front window with all the lights turned off, waiting to see if they'd come creeping back. Thankfully they didn't, but that night I locked every door in the house, which I always did anyways, and slept with a hammer, machete, and baseball bat next to me and my pocket knife under the pillow. Complete overkill, I know, but I was terrified. Now I know where my dad keeps his gun, so if it ever happens again, I'll be better prepared. Last year, I was dog sitting for my aunt. The dog is small, sweet, and a little skittish. I had worked most of the week, so I was just living in the house for the time being. It's a nice house, not big enough to feel empty if you're alone, but not small enough to feel cramped. The only rooms I used were the kitchen, bathroom, living room, and the guest bedroom. My last day of work this particular week was a double shift. I was excited because after this I had 2 days off. I planned on using them to introduce the dog to RuPaul's Drag Race. I usually try to keep good spirits for a double shift because regardless of the time and annoying customers, extra money is always needed. My old job was a barista and cashier. Mornings are always busy and nights are slow. On weekends, people are more concerned with coffee and breakfast than anything else we may have to offer. I was having a nice time, actually, because this day was turning out to be not as hectic as the previous ones that week, one even involving a small fire. As the morning rush line was dwindling, the limited tables in the restaurant came into view and I started people watching. As I slowly scanned the customers eating bagels and reading the paper, my eyes met a man at a laptop. He had long, dirty hair and a bit of a stubble. He stared at me with a little too much intensity. I wondered if he found my people watching rude, so I decided to clean and restock instead. It didn't take long for a line to reform, so I returned to my register. Once again, after the line died down, I could see the few tables in the front. The man was still there and he was still staring at me. Every now and then he would look at his computer and then back to me. It almost felt like he was looking right through me, or like he could see every part of me. It felt so uncomfortable that I went and cleaned in the back of the restaurant, out of his sight. After the next rush, I took my break and sat far away from the man. He was out of sight and I was out of his. When I came back from the break, the man was gone. My manager asked if I had interacted with him at all. I told her about him making eye contact with me, but that nothing else really happened. She told me that the man had been watching 18+ content on his laptop and she had asked him to leave. So that was weird enough. The man had been watching that and stared at me. I really wish that this is where the story stopped. Hours passed and the rest of the day was entirely normal, despite me and a few female coworkers feeling a slight edge. We were in the process of closing, which is actually a process I really enjoy. We're well in and I'm almost done with my assigned jobs when my manager comes up to me again. She informs me that the man had found his way back in the restaurant at some point and she found him hiding in a back corner. She chased him out by threatening to call the police. She knew that earlier in the day he seemed to be paying attention to me. She said I could finish up whatever I wanted or needed to, but afterwards she strongly advised me to get home as soon as possible. She also offered to walk me to my car. I took both offers and quickly got my things together and clocked out. My aunt's house was not far from work. It was a 5-minute drive at most, which was helpful because then I didn't feel the crippling anxiety for much longer. I got in the house and after triple checking that I had locked every door, got into my pajamas. But unsurprisingly, I was not ready to sleep yet. Now was the time to introduce the dog to RuPaul's Drag Race. I went into the living room. The living room consists of a couch, 2 chairs, a TV, a window, and the front door. Unfortunately, the porch light was broken and the window had no curtains. That had me a little stressed, but I was willing to take that over the only other TV in the house, which was the one that exists in the scary basement. Facing the basement TV included having my back to a sliding glass door facing the very dark woods. No thanks. I was setting up the TV when the dog started growling. I really didn't think much of it. As I said, the dog is skittish so he growls and barks all the time. I wasn't looking at him. I was muttering shush shush and figuring out how to work the TV. The dog didn't stop and started to get louder, so I finally put down the remote and I turned to face the dog. I froze. The dog was barking at the window and there was an outline of a man at the window, the exact same build as the one at the restaurant. I screamed and luckily that was enough for the man to run away from the window. I stood there frozen for a while. The dog had calmed down but I hardly felt safe. So I went into the kitchen, grabbed a big knife and called my mom. She did not advise calling the police, my mom never does, and instead came and spent the night with me. I told my aunt. I spent the rest of my time dog sitting, clutching the knife anytime I slept or took a shower. My aunt also gave me permission to have one friend stay with me every night. Nothing else ever happened. I never even saw the guy come into work again. A part of me wishes I knew who he was or where he went, or what he even wanted with me. I'm glad he was a coward and that all it took to scare him off was my scream and an extra small dog. The year was 1995 and I was 16 years old. I lived in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in a middle-class suburban community with my mother, 2 younger brothers, and our 140-pound Doberman, Turbo. From the front door of our house, relevant, you could see directly into our living room, which had an open concept floor plan with the kitchen and dining room. Our couch was on the wall directly in front of the front door. It was the summer between my sophomore and junior years in high school. My brothers and I spent a decent amount of time outdoors. I suppose anyone paying attention knew who lived in our house, and I suppose they knew that the only adult was gone when the only car was gone. However, prior to the man showing up at the house, I never noticed anything off, and I never noticed anything afterwards, so maybe we were just a random target. It was a Saturday and Mom and the boys had run to the grocery store. In Nevada in the 90s, almost no one had air conditioning, so to cool off, you would open up all the windows and doors and use fans. On this particular day, I had the back sliding door and front door wide open to get a cross breeze. Neither screen door was locked. I was napping on the couch in full view of the front door in shorts and a tank top, with unlocked doors. In my defense, there was 140 pounds of protective dog muscle on the floor next to me, and probably only for that reason am I alive. Around the approximate time I expected my family home from the store, Turbo began barking. Assuming he was barking their arrival, I told him to shush and try to go back to sleep. Turbo continued to bark, becoming more and more intense and even aggressive with his barking. Finally, after 5 to 10 minutes of Turbo refusing to quiet and my family never coming in from the car, I sat up, realizing something was wrong. A man who I didn't know stood, seemingly frozen, staring at my frenzied and barking Doberman. Assuming that the man had some appropriate business at my home, I hurried the 10 steps to the unlocked screen door, constantly shushing Turbo. I apologized for my dog and for not hearing his knock. He never knocked. The man explained that he was from the phone company and he was here to check our lines. He never took his eyes off Turbo. Turbo never stopped snarling. I leaned forward far enough to see the street. Only unmarked, privately owned cars lined the street. I looked at the man who was dressed in tennis shoes, jeans, and a t-shirt. I was 16 and dumb enough to nap in front of an unlocked door, but I was no fool. Phone company personnel A. Always wear uniforms, B. Always drive company vehicles, and C. Don't come without being called, and D. Don't work weekends. I looked at the man who had yet to look up from the 140-pound dog that was now foaming at the mouth. I grasped the screen door handle and held it. This got his attention. He met my eyes as I said, "You have 30 seconds to show me identification or I'll open this door." I don't even think he made an incoherent excuse as he ran away. I fell to my knees and hugged Turbo. I then gave him all the meat in the fridge. I believe with absolute certainty that I would have been attacked if we hadn't had him. I like to think that if I hadn't had a huge, overly protective dog, I would have been in the habit of locking doors. But what would a screen door latch do against an intruder? And that creep stood there and watched me for 5 to 10 minutes. Perhaps he was paralyzed in fear, but maybe he was working his angles and only Turbo's insistent display of his willingness to kill anyone who threatened to be changed his mind. That's my theory. Turbo is long past, but his legacy lives on, and 2 loving, loyal, and lethal when necessary dogs sleep in my room every night. For context, I'm a 5'3", 24-year-old female and working as a programmer for an IT company in the Philippines. Now the area where my office is in comprises of 3 buildings. Building A, where my office is in, Building B, and Building C. To get to the other building, it would take you like around 10 minutes to get there, important for later. This happened to me a year ago around the end of February until March. I just got out of a bad breakup at the time and I really intended it just to focus on myself and not meet anyone yet. I just got out of work and it's around 7 p.m. on a Friday night and went to my usual waiting spot, which has benches and is located at the back of our building near the entrance of the underground parking. For our company shuttle, and Omar, shuttle dispatcher, is there. Now, I've known Omar for 2 years and is someone I consider now as a friend, and we would often chat about our lives, even the breakup with my ex then, and joke around. He's a 40-plus-year-old guy and he gives out this big fatherly vibe, so he's really someone that I trust. That night, he was there and with someone new that I didn't recognize. Our conversation went like this. "Omar, oh hi. Good thing you're here. I would like you to meet someone since he told me he already wants to meet you for a long time now. And then this guy stood up and shook my hand. I greeted him as just to be polite, and this new guy, let's name him Ray. He's average looking and a little shorter to my height, 5'1" I think. And he instantly gave off an all 5 as soon as I shook his hand. I thought that would be the end of it, but he proceeded to talk to me for a few minutes while I wait for my shuttle to arrive. Omar has purposely left me and this Ray guy so that we could talk and get to know each other. I'm actually puzzled at this point because 1. I have no clue who this guy is and why he would be so eager to meet me, and 2. I clearly told Omar before that I'm not into meeting anyone just yet. But for the sake of being polite and nice, I talked to Ray, but we never reached any personal questions, exchanging numbers, social media accounts, or even telling him my full name. I just told him my nickname, and I left it just as that when I finally got on the shuttle. Fast forward to a week and Friday again, I got off at work in the same time and surprise surprise, Ray is there again with Omar and a security guard. They were chatting, but as soon as I came, Ray instantly greeted me, and at this point, I'm a little creeped out as I expected our encounter would only be a one-time thing. I just said hi and brushed him off and sat on the benches to wait for my shuttle again, and of course, as this guy doesn't seem to know the definition of personal space, sat beside me and talked to me again, but this time he's asking for my cell phone number. I told him off and clearly said that I'm not giving out my number to strangers and just giving him one-word answers just to give an impression that I wasn't interested at all. He would ask, why wouldn't you give your number? I just want to be friends. And I could see it in his face that he was getting frustrated every time I told him I wasn't giving it to him. This happened while Omar and the security guard was looking at us from afar, but this went on until I got on the shuttle again. As soon as I got home, I mindlessly scrolled through my timeline and saw a notification that I have a new friend request, and guess what? It's Ray, and he even messaged me with a please accept my friend request. I just deleted his request, but now I'm pretty shocked since I didn't tell him my Facebook account, so how did he manage to find me? The following day was the last straw when I decided to get off at an earlier time so that I could avoid him, but to my surprise, he was there, again waiting for me, along with Omar and the security guard. Ray immediately ran up to me to say hi, but I brushed him off and dreaded the fact that I would have to wait with this creep again when I saw my shuttle isn't there yet. He immediately asked me if I accepted his Facebook request, and I decided to play dumb and said I haven't been active on Facebook and I haven't seen any requests. He got disappointed and he fiddled with his phone for a bit and then revealed his phone to show my Facebook profile and asked me if this was me. I said yes, and this time, I was completely ignoring him at this point and playing with my phone and told him that I wasn't going to accept his request because I don't know him. And then Ray grabbed my phone out of my hands angrily and said he was gonna add himself using my Facebook account if I won't. I muttered a what the and grabbed my phone from him, and with perfect timing, I got on the shuttle in a hurry and told the driver to go. At this point, I could confirm that this guy could be stalking me and now knows my daily schedule and social media accounts. I reported this incident to my manager and told her how this was already happening for some time now. She was surprised that I didn't report it earlier, but I blamed it on my lack of assertiveness and fear that I might be overreacting to his advances. We reported the incident to office security and told them what happened, and they couldn't do anything at first as 1. I need actual evidence about my allegations to him, and 2. I only knew Ray by his first name and they would need more information than that. I didn't bother to ask where he's from or if he's even working in our office/building, which is dumb of me and I should have asked in the first place. My manager then decided that I should be at least accompanied by some of my office mates to confirm the situation, and the guys volunteered to accompany me every time I got off work. They accompanied me for a couple days, and no matter what time I got out, Ray was there to harass me. I felt bad for my office mates as they had to deal with his BS as well. First instance, when he saw I was with my office mates, I could see the visible anger in his eyes, and he would try to butt in our conversation even if we were ignoring him. At one point when I'm talking with my office mates, he let out an exasperated sigh and said, "Can I talk to you for a second, please? What do you want?" "I just want to talk to you. If you don't, I'll leave." Okay, and then I went back to talking to my office mates. He butted in once more and asked that I should introduce him to my office mates when I didn't. He proceeded to introduce himself instead, which irked the heck out of my office mates and I, as his behavior doesn't seem normal at all. After that incident, my office mates and I told my manager what happened and how dangerous this guy might be. She decided that we should escalate it to HR and have them deal with it immediately. Gladly, HR responded and took the situation seriously and began to do an investigation on who Ray might be. Same day, they sent an email that after searching through records, turns out Ray wasn't an employee at our office and they might need to talk to building security to find out more about this guy. HR also requested our office security to escort me and observe the situation. I honestly felt relieved as now I'll feel safe for the time being while they search for who Ray might be. He still showed up even if I got out late or earlier than usual, but never went near me when he saw I was accompanied by security, but he would just keep his distance and stare at me, smile creepily, and linger outside my shuttle until it left. HR contacted me for a meeting with him and my manager about some news on Ray, and I was shocked by the information that they found out. Ray was not an employee of our building/office, but in fact, a temp in the security office in Building C. I then thought, okay, this creep is really putting an effort for someone who is clearly not interested, and if he's a temp, meaning there's a chance I won't be able to see him after this. But then what HR said chilled me to the bone. He was a temp assigned to work on the security cameras, meaning he had access to all the building cameras. It has been his way to spy on me and the reason why he was able to be there at the exact same time I got out. HR has already spoken to his supervisor and gave a warning to Ray, and of course, Ray denied the allegations even if I had witnesses against him. The supervisor wanted to apologize to me in person, but I decided not to as I just wanted this to be over with. After that meeting, I never saw Ray again, and I reckon he must have been kicked out after HR issued warning against him. As for Omar, I never seen him as well, and I felt bad, but he was also part of the people who enabled Ray and didn't do anything when I was clearly getting harassed. I received a bit of backlash from the security guards at the building for a while as well, hearing them say that I was overreacting and I should have accepted his advances, which was disgusting, as I heard the same thing being said by female building staff as well. Nothing strange happened for a few days, but then the security guard that was with Omar at the time when Ray was harassing me added me on Facebook, but I didn't make much of it and just deleted the request. I'm still working in the same office and building as of today and been totally shaken up by the incident that I decided just to keep my distance from people so I could avoid from this ever happening again, and to Ray, please don't meet me again. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This story is of my brief friendship with a guy that near stalked me, and I'm sharing it for some closure, I think. I started my freshman year of college at a university in my hometown that's pretty nice. I'm not going to share too much about it, but it has a smaller amount of students but enough that you don't really run into people often. I lived on campus and I was only 17 at the time. I had Tinder, of course, as I was fresh out of a relationship and looking to experience new things in college. I matched with this one boy, Asher, who seemed nice enough. Pretty socially awkward, but I never really minded because I have anxiety issues myself and I'm really sympathetic to it. Because of that, I ignored a lot of warning signs I shouldn't have. We texted for a while and he seemed really nice and caring. He wanted to know a lot about me, which I wasn't too keen on sharing, but I told him the basics and we texted kind of regularly. He lived on campus as well and invited me to hang out. At that time, things didn't seem too sketchy, so I was completely down. When I first met him, that's when things started to get uncomfortable. We hung out in his dorm, which is pretty standard overall. I got cozy with him on his couch. I'd say almost cuddling, but not quite. Still, really standard. When we started talking more, I realized how uncomfortable things really were. He kept making comments that just put me off, but I tried to ignore them. Things like, I've never really cuddled with anyone before, sorry if I'm doing it wrong. And so many comments about how he already liked me a lot and wanted me to stay forever. Weird word choice, but whatever, he's just trying to be nice. I let him down easy. I ended that hangout pretty quickly for some fake excuse, and went right back to my room. He kept texting me and professing how much he was into me, and I told him sorry, but I'm not looking for any kind of relationship, so I do not want to keep things romantic. A bad lie, but I'm very non-confrontational and I didn't want to be mean. That's when things started to get really weird. He sent me this long paragraph saying about how it was okay I didn't want a relationship now, and that he'd wait for me to save his virginity for me. We had never talked about anything sexual. I had never really even told him I liked him or flirted back. I just never turned him down. It was one of the creepiest messages I've ever received. Unfortunately, this was just the start of all the things we were to come. He wouldn't leave me alone even though I kept trying to de-escalate things, and I kept running into him all over campus. I wasn't sure how he suddenly was nearby when my classes ended, and I wasn't sure why suddenly we'd both be in the dining hall at the same times, even though I hadn't changed my regular routine, but I just tried to brush it off. Definitely a mistake. I ended up turning him down completely because I was getting creeped out and couldn't figure out how he wasn't understanding that I didn't want anything romantic or sexual with him, telling me how he was gonna off himself and no one was ever gonna love him. I've been in a manipulative relationship in the past, and I recognized that behavior right away and shut it down. I told him I couldn't be friends with him, and in my head that was that. He didn't reply for a while, but when he did, everything broke loose. I was luckily out of town at the time for a concert, so that made me feel a lot better. He went off, sent me paragraphs after paragraph about how horrible of a person I was, and how I needed to get put in my place, etc. I could handle that, I just ignored it. Then once the regret set in, he made it his mission to win my love however possible. He apologized profusely, told me how he couldn't be all alone and I was his only friend, and how much he loved me. Whatever, terrible, but I didn't care about that. Then, I guess to prove his dedication, he did the creepiest thing yet. met. First, he told me he was outside my room. We did not live in the same dorm building, and you can't get into the buildings unless you live there. I don't know who let him in. I wasn't there, and my roommate was out, so that was okay. I texted back at that point and told him to leave and how wrong and creepy that was, and he pulled out his last resort. He just sent me screenshots of my contact in his phone. On Apple devices, you could fill in tons of information and have a note section. Everything was entirely full. He knew my home address, my room number at campus, my parents and brother's names, my pets' names, my schedule. It was terrifying because I'm a fairly private person. My Instagram is my only social media and I do not share that much on it. I don't think I'll ever find out how he discovered all that about me. I blocked him on everything right away and reported him to school. The school did nothing at all. I still see him on campus, but it seems like he doesn't care about me anymore gladly. I was around 16 years old when this happened to me. It was just me and my dad at our house, and since he was a businessman that traveled frequently, I was left home alone quite often. First of all, I'm going to try to do my best to describe you the layout of my house so you can better understand my situation. My house is pretty small since it's just my father, my dog, and me living in it. There's a long hallway full of full-size windows separating my dad's room and mine. Our dog loved to look out the windows, so we always kept them open enough for her to look out. I'm the last room at the end of the hallway. In between the two rooms is my bathroom and a spare room. All the rest is irrelevant. Let's get to it. It was around 11 p.m. when the worst night of my life began. My dad was passed out in bed after a long day, and I was mindlessly dancing around my house getting ready for bed. I just hopped in my shower, not knowing what was coming ahead, when my dog starts aggressively barking up a storm. I walk out the bathroom and go out and explore. I head to my room to throw some clothes on while my dog is still barking. Months before, I'm not sure how I managed to break my door handle, but you don't have to twist the knob to open it. All it needs is a small push. Scared, I barely managed to put a shirt on when my dog opened the door. I looked to see her enter my room, while in the midst of barking, that's when I saw it. There's only one window that has vision to the opening in my room, and in the corner of it I saw a face. It was dark, so I took a second to comprehend what I just saw, but when I finally realized it, I screamed. My dad owns lots of guns, so when he heard me scream, he ran out with a pistol. He asked me what happened and could barely mutter what I saw. He ran outside to see if the man with the terrifying face was still near. We stood out there for maybe a minute scanning the area. A man was casually strolling towards us from the opposite direction from about 100 yards away. I knew it was him. I got that feeling in my stomach that you can't mistake. It was like he was trying to cover up that he was there by coming from a different direction. But he didn't fool me. You better stay away from my daughter. You see what I have here, you know what this does. Holding up his gun, I could have sworn my dad was going to shoot. The man brushed these threats off easily. My dad and I went back inside. He went back to bed like nothing had happened, but I could not sleep a wink. I kept thinking he was going to come back and hurt me because of the threats to him. We called the cops the next morning and they came and scoped out our house. He looked around the house trying to calm me down, but I was still pretty shaken up. He went to the front yard and that's when he saw it. In front of the windows in the long hallway there were small bushes, nothing much. The cop from outside went to the window that had view of my room and there it was. If he tried to tell me the news without making me more upset, he failed. There were incidents in the dirt right in front of the window. That meant he knew where he needed to look for you, and it seems as if he had come here more than once because of the broken pieces of bush and the divots in the ground. Turns out he was the nephew of my old neighbor and he had been staying there for months. Never arrested, never got in trouble, probably barely got a slap on the wrist. But at least he's gone now. How long had he been watching me? I'll never know. All I know is I keep my door shut and I never keep the blinds open. To begin, I've always had this feeling that someone was watching me ever since I moved into my family house 8 years ago. At first I thought I was just being paranoid, but I could not help looking over my shoulder when I would walk to school or to my bus stop. When I would walk to school, I was always scared in the mornings when it would be dark during the winter or fall because where I live is just vast country lands. I live in Canada and although not much crime habits in my neighborhood, I never could rid myself of this eerie feeling. Even when I would come home from school, being home alone did not help. I would triple check my windows and locks to make sure everything was locked. However, in my basement, our garage door would never fully lock since the door hinge was broken and detached from the door. Therefore, it would never properly close. I always told my dad to fix this door, but because he would always go away for work, he never found the time to do so. Stupidly, I thought nothing bad would happen since my garage needed a 4-digit passcode to get in. Now my theory is that he knew the passcode of my house. Therefore, he had free reign for 7 years to go through my things. At first I thought I was being forgetful. Maybe I was the one who misplaced my underwear somewhere. Maybe I was the one who misplaced my favorite top, or maybe my dad accidentally donated it. But I should have known better. During my 4 years in high school, he never really contacted me. It was when I went to university that things started to change. Since I live in the countryside, I decided to go to a university an hour away. My dad did not want me to live on residence because he didn't want to leave the house unattended for long periods of time. so we came to the conclusion that it would be the best if I drive to and from school. Now, I would leave for university very early in the morning, around 6 a.m., and come back around 6 p.m. at night. I stopped being aware of my surroundings at this time because I would be tired from my 12-hour days, and now that I wasn't walking alone, everything would be fine. When I would come home from university, I would find certain things moved in my house. I am a neat freak and I like things a particular way in my house. When little things like my makeup or candles would be moved, I thought it was odd and would frequently bring it up to my dad, but he would just say that it must have been me who was doing it, but it wasn't me. During my second and third year in university, I started getting weird notes in my mailbox. The writing on these notes looked almost childlike and it would always be written in blue ink. I have those country-style mailboxes at the end of my driveway where the little red flag goes up whenever we get mail. From my way back from university, I would always check the mail and sometimes I would find these letters. The letters would never be long. In fact, they would only be 1 to 3 sentences that would contain odd questions like, "Where are you? I wonder what you do while you're away from home. How do you find university? It must be tiring driving that long. Did you make new friends? Do you still hang out with your best friend? You dress differently now. Why is that? I miss the scarves you used to wear. You don't close your curtains as much anymore. Why don't you look for me?" These letters would always come once a month at the beginning of the month. I would show my dad and at first he would say, "Oh, maybe your cousins are just pranking you, or it's probably your friends." But every time I would ask my friends or cousins, they would give me this confused response saying that they never sent me any letters. Now that I am in my 4th year at university, the letters do not come as frequently, but 2 weeks ago something happened that makes me think that things are escalating. I came back home from university at 7:45 p.m. and it was fairly dark outside. I saw that my mailbox flag was up, so I checked the mail and it was just bills. At this point, I haven't gotten a note for a little over 3 months now, so I am thinking maybe the notes will not come anymore. As I settle in for bed, I change into my pajamas and I check the locks usually. As I checked my front door lock, I look out the glass panel on my door and I saw that the red flag on my mailbox is up. It's 10:30 at night, so no way the mail could have gotten dropped off, and plus I just checked the mail. I call my dad and tell him about it and he said not to freak out and that maybe one of our neighbors accidentally got our mail and just dropped it off since this happens frequently. I stay on the phone with my dad and quickly run down my driveway to check my mailbox. As I open the mailbox, I feel my heart drop because it's an unmarked manila envelope. I quickly run back inside and open the manila envelope, and although there is no written note, I find something more disturbing. It is a pair of my old blue panties that I haven't seen in years. At this point I scream and my dad tells me to hang up and call my aunt, who is a police officer. My aunt comes over and checks the inside and outside of my house, but she can't find anything. She tries to jog my memory and ask if I know anyone who could be doing this, but I honestly have no clue. My aunt told me to keep any more letters I get and she has been staying with me the days my dad is out for work. I just hope that we're able to find whoever this is. About 2 years ago when I was 17, I received a Facebook message from someone named Dan who I didn't recognize. I had mutual friends with him and he looked to be around the same age as me, so I wasn't alarmed. What follows is the messages. Dan, hello, have you been? Haven't seen you in a few years. Me, hi, not trying to be rude, but do we know each other? Dan, yeah, you really don't know me? I didn't respond. Dan, wow, real nice way to treat a family friend. Me, sorry, I just don't recognize you. Dan then sent a picture of me and him together from when we were little, and I mean really little, like I looked maybe 2 or 3 and he looked 5 or 6. Me, oh wow, did our parents used to be friends or something? Dan, I was your neighbor, you really don't recognize me, come on, I didn't move that long ago. He had in fact moved a long time ago, at least 12 years ago, so I honestly feel like it's not that uncommon for me to not recognize someone who I hadn't seen or talked about since I was 4. Anyways, the conversation continued like that. I apologized for not remembering him and just started catching up. He was being nice enough and I was bored, so whatever, no harm, no foul. After we kept talking, I started remembering more about him. Like I remembered him coming over and swinging in my backyard and me going over to his house with my big brother and all of us hanging out together. Dan was a few years older than me, at least 2, but I can't remember exactly. Anyways, we kept talking on Facebook, just messaging back and forth about normal things until it started to get late and I was tired and at school the next day, so I told him I was going to bed. I closed my computer and just laid down and went to sleep. The next morning I woke up to a bunch of messages from him. Things like "Good night beautiful" and "Sweet dreams," "Message me when you wake up," "Are you asleep yet?" "Can't wait to talk to you." Literally there was almost 50 messages. I was creeped out, but I opened the messages and glanced through them and just didn't reply. On my phone I have it set to where I don't get notifications from Facebook Messenger. At the time I was in a lot of group chats with different team sports and group of friends, so it was just easier to at the end of the day check my messages versus getting a ton of notifications all day long. Some point during the day I had gotten more messages from him that I just hadn't noticed while I was at school. He was saying stuff like, "Do you still live at insert address here?" I did still live there. "Does your mom still freak out about you hanging with boys?" My mom has never freaked out over boys. "Let's go out and catch up. Let me take you out and treat you right. He just kept going on and on with really random questions that weren't necessarily threatening but just somewhat creepy. He then talked about wanting to go on dates even though he didn't even live in the same state anymore that I live in, so I have no idea how he would have planned on going on dates with me. The messages just kept continuing over the next week, him telling me he wants to go on dates and asking me really weird questions about my mom, my brother, and my house, and then he started asking about his house that he used to live in. I didn't reply to any of his messages, but I was getting at least 50 a day. Eventually, I brought it up to my mom and just asked her if she remembered Dan from next door. Her face completely drained of color and she got super serious all of a sudden, and she asked me why I was bringing him up. I told her that he had messaged me on Facebook and was trying to get me to go out on a date with him and was just trying to catch up. I didn't tell her he'd been messaging me 50 plus times a day and I wasn't responding at this point. She told me to block him and never message him again. I asked her why, and this is a summary of what she told me. When I was 3 or 4, I used to play over at his house a lot. His mom would always offer to babysit me if my mom had to go out and run errands, and he also had a little sister who was around my age, so my mom figured it was a perfect opportunity for a play date between Dan, my brother, me, and Dan's little sister. One day when I came home after one of these play dates, my mom was asking me and my brother what we had done that day. My brother started talking about how he had watched some movie. I apparently told my mom that Dan had brushed my hair for me. My mom thought that was a little weird that a 6-year-old boy wanted to brush a 3-year-old girl's hair, so she asked a couple more questions and it came out that he wasn't brushing my hair. He had been taking a brush and was rubbing it all over my body while I was only in my undies. My brother didn't know anything about this because we had been in Dan's room and my brother had been in the living room with Dan's little sister. After that, my mom didn't let me go back over to his house. Apparently when my mom confronted his mom about it, a huge fight broke out. Not physically, but a screaming match. It turns out that Dan had been doing similar stuff to his little sister, but it had escalated farther than that with me. My mom threatened to report them to the police or Child Protective Services. She did both, but before much could be done, they moved out and found somewhere else to live. They were renting the house. After hearing that from my mom, I immediately blocked Dan on Facebook. I wasn't quick enough, I guess, however, because he messaged a bunch of my friends on Facebook asking about me and had changed his relationship status to taken and in a relationship with me. He then followed me on Instagram and found my Snapchat somehow. He liked and commented on almost all of my Instagram pictures and sent me a bunch of Snapchats. I quickly blocked him on both and luckily he never figured out my phone number. Luckily I haven't heard from him since. We were both 16 and 13 respectively. My sister and I were home alone while my parents were out of state for a couple of days to attend the funeral of a longtime family friend. Our grandfather lived only a couple miles away and was originally supposed to babysit us, but he trusted my sister and I would be fine, and he would be on call if anything were to go bad. Well, of course, something did. Just our luck. It was around 10 p.m. or somewhere close to that on the second night, and I was upstairs in my bed trying to sleep after a long day of biking around with a couple of friends. My sister suddenly came running up the stairs, which she almost never did unless she was in a hurry for some reason. She came into my room and was frantically talking to someone on the phone. I lied there in confusion while she talked. I don't remember exactly what was said, but when she hung up, she hugged me and told me that everything was alright and that Grandpa was on his way. What had happened was that my sister was sitting outside on our stoop talking to a friend of hers on the phone when a pickup truck came rolling onto our driveway. My parents don't own a pickup, so I immediately threw up a red flag. Once she saw a man get out carrying a duffel bag, that's when she came running inside and called our grandfather. My grandfather may have been 60 at the time, but he's no pushover, being 6'4" and having the strength of Godzilla with a demeanor to match when it comes to protecting his loved ones. He also owns firearms, which I wouldn't doubt for a second he would bring alone in case something really hit the fan. We also lived in an area where the police would take a bit of time to reach, which is another reason why my sister called him and not the authorities. Suddenly, we hear what sounds like a door being kicked open downstairs. Almost immediately afterwards, we began barricading my bedroom door, since none of the bedroom doors had locks on them at the time. Once we're done, she looks at the window while I sit there, covering myself with my blanket. All the while we hear footsteps downstairs on our hardwood kitchen floor. My sister then looked around my room and asked if I had a bat or something, which I did in my closet. My Louisville slugger that I used when my parents made me play baseball when I was in elementary school. I also had a hockey stick, but who would use that as a weapon unless in a very circumstantial situation? She rummaged through my closet and found it, then stood next to the door while I ducked down behind her, thinking maybe I should grab the hockey stick, but it's much less intimidating than a bat. Unless this burglar has some sort of PTSD associated with hockey, then this is the ultimate weapon. We then hear the sound of a gunshot followed by a man yelling out in pain. The sound of both I can still hear even to this day when I think about it hard enough. My sister and I are standing by the door, almost sobbing, when about a minute later, we then hear my grandfather yell out our names, asking if we were alright, to which we both yelled out simultaneously that we were. My sister and I pulled the dresser and various other objects out the way of my door, and we both went out into the hallway. We heard my grandfather on the phone with 911 as we stood at the top of the stairs. When the police and ambulance arrived, the man who had broken in was taken out on a stretcher, to which I later learned was shot in the abdomen. My grandfather had come in through the same back door and found the man in our kitchen looking through drawers. When he came at my grandfather with one of our kitchen knives, that's when he was shot. The man almost died from blood loss, but ended up surviving, and I hope he's learned his lesson, both through being incarcerated and by being shot in the abdomen and almost losing his life. But, of course, you never know with certain people, especially the nefarious ones. This all started my sophomore year of high school. I was 15 and at a new school, so I didn't have many friends yet. I was in that phase where I thought I needed a boyfriend to have validation, so I was actively trying to find a date for the homecoming dance. A classmate suggested a junior in one of her classes, whom I will call David, to be my date and got him to ask me out. He seemed nice, so I said yes, a decision that would haunt me for the next 2 years. David and I had fun at homecoming, so when he asked me to be his girlfriend, I said yes. It's important to know that he was quite the loner. He was very much into science and often spent alone conducting experiments in his room and even at school at times. I just brushed it off as him being quirky and figured I shouldn't get in the way of his passions. But it wasn't long before I realized there was much more to his nice guy facade. Over the first several weeks of our relationship, we would talk over the phone and David would make increasingly inappropriate comments about things he wanted to do to me. I was 15 at the time and he was 17, so not only was I incredibly uncomfortable, but he was also nearly an adult making these comments to a younger girl. I kept telling him I wasn't comfortable with the things he was saying, but he always laughed it off as me being prude. I was fed up after a while and finally threatened to break up with him, and that finally made him stop. I should have recognized the red flags and bailed at that moment, but again, I was dumb and felt I wasn't worth anything unless I had a boyfriend. Although the inappropriate comments stopped for the time being, he would still become increasingly possessive and downright obsessed over what I was doing at all hours of the day. He would intrude on conversations I had with my friends and want to know things that frankly weren't any of his business. One day when I was getting into the shower, he called and my dad told him I would call him when I was done. Instead of simply waiting like any rational person would do, he called a total of 4 times over the next 10 to 15 minutes to see if I was out of the shower yet. I began to feel suffocated, but every time I asked him to back off, he would cry about how depressed he was and that he only wanted to talk to someone to feel like he was wanted. I always fell for it like the dummy I was, but now I recognize the clear manipulation that it was. One day I finally had enough. I broke up with him in person at school and he bawled like a child. I didn't let it get to me this time, however, and firmly told him that I didn't want to be his girlfriend anymore. Although he couldn't get his way, he still somehow convinced me to stay friends. I know I was an idiot, but things didn't end there. Over the next several months, David kept trying to get me to go out with him again, even going as far as to cry in front of other people to garner sympathy. Fortunately for me, David had earned a bad reputation throughout his school year, so no one really believed him. He would even try to trick me into a date by subtly suggesting we go see a movie as friends, which I always got around by inviting my friends to come along too. They knew what he was doing and never turned down the chance to help a girl out. In the last few weeks I spoke to him, he would sit on the phone for hours on end literally begging me to take him back, and thankfully I held on strong and kept refusing. One night his brother actually called me telling me he was crying hysterically. Eventually it came to a point where I told him I didn't want to hang out anymore, because it was clear that he would not stop until I became his girlfriend again. He agreed to not approach me anymore, but I wouldn't be writing this story if it ended here. The very next day at school, David came up to me like nothing had happened. I once again reminded him of the conversation we had the night before about how we agreed to not hang out anymore, but he acted offended that I would even suggest such a thing. Eventually, my friends and I convinced him to leave, but of course it didn't stop there. For 2 weeks straight, he would follow me around school, call my house and my cell phone. For 2 weeks straight, he would follow me around school and call my house. This was the days before smartphones, so blocking his number wasn't as easy. I tried to get help from the school staff, but the vice principal basically told me that there was nothing I could do because he wasn't trying to hurt me. I was frustrated, but thankfully David seemed to back off when it was clear that I wasn't going to give in. That is until I got another boyfriend. The following school year, my junior year, I started dating a senior named Justin. Not long after we went public with our relationship, I noticed David following me again. Now Justin was a football player and he was a pretty big guy with unresolved anger issues, so he didn't take kindly to this guy. He would hang out with me and my friends and David would hover over nearby, walking by every now and then and making it blatantly obvious that he was spying on me. One day, Justin walked straight up to David and confronted him. He didn't lay his hands on him or threaten him in any way, but he did ask, "What are you doing?" in a really angry tone. David simply muttered some kind of excuse and scurried away. We thought that was the end of it, but later in the day I was called to the principal's office. Turns out David claimed that Justin threatened him and blocked the doorway so he couldn't move. Justin denied it, of course, and told the principal I could back up his claim, which I did. Thankfully, nothing came of it, but this was only the first of a long line of incidents. Over the school year, David and his brother, who was a year younger than me, would try to get Justin in trouble every which way they could, even started rumors and threatening his life. A classmate of mine overheard them talking about ambushing Justin and hurting him, but even though I brought this to the staff, nothing was done about it. All the while, David kept following me when Justin wasn't around. There was even an incident in the school gym one day when a bunch of classes had to stay there for the period. He and I both were there and he made sure to sit on the bleachers nearby, even following me when I moved. I was on the verge of tears, but then I saw two guys I knew sitting on a few rows down from me. They were cool with me, so I got their attention and, after explaining what was going on, asked them if I could sit with them to feel safer. They accepted and we ended up having a good time talking about music. In spite of this, things just kept getting worse with David. Finally, it came to a head when David's brother wrote a letter to Justin's sister. They had been good friends before this whole mess started, and in the letter David's brother threatened physical harm to me and to Justin. The sister gave the letter to Justin, who then came to me, and we both brought it to the principal. That was when the principal called everyone involved into his office and had a nice little chat with us. The principal showed the letter to David's brother and said, "I can expel you for this right now, but I'm willing to let it go on one condition." David and Justin were both about to graduate, so the principal gave them the ultimatum. He stated that David and his brother were not to contact me or Justin in any way, shape, or form for the rest of the school year, or he would see to that neither of them would graduate. I was pissed because Justin did nothing wrong, but in the end, we just wanted this whole mess to be over with. From that point on, David didn't bother me again, thankfully. Justin and I ended up breaking up that summer for unrelated reasons, and the following year I didn't have to see either of them ever again. A few years later, however, David tried to send me friend requests on Facebook. I deleted the request and blocked them. I even unfriended and blocked the two mutual friends we had for good measure. Sure, I was being paranoid, but it made me feel better. There was one last incident involving David, not with me, but with my younger brother. When he was 14, he took his then girlfriend to see one of the Transformer movies and David walked in. Upon recognizing my brother, he sat behind him in his date and kept laughing uncontrollably at inappropriate times and even started kicking their seat. My brother tried confronting him, but it did no good. They didn't bother getting the manager because my brother's date was too afraid he would attack them if they tried to leave. Thankfully, that was the last incident I or anyone close to me ever had with him. I'm doing much better now. I'm 30 years old and, ironically, I ended up marrying one of the guys who sat with me in the gym that day. My advice to any teenagers reading this is that you should always pay attention to red flags and get rid of toxic people in your life. It's always better to end up alone than stuck with someone who makes you feel bad and treats you like your feelings don't matter. This happened a few years ago when I was bartending in college. I was coming home down a stretch of divided highway at around 3 a.m. when I noticed a car heading towards me in the wrong lane. I doubted myself at first and thought that the car was on the other side of the highway. Sure enough, the white Ford sedan passed me at a really high speed at around 90 miles per hour. It's worth noting for later that I also drive a white Ford sedan. I was used to drunk/idiot drivers in the middle of the night, so I pulled to the side of the road and let him pass me. I had a moment of clarity and thought to call the police, thinking this person could hurt themselves or somebody else. The dispatcher answered, and after telling them which road and exit/mile marker I was at, told me they would send a car. The state police station was only a few exits away, so I figured they would send somebody and I would just drive home. As I headed back onto the highway, I noticed some lights a few miles behind me. I live in a more rural part of southeastern Pennsylvania, and traffic at 3 a.m. tends to be truckers and cops. The car gained on me as I was getting up to speed, so I stayed in the right lane and waited to be passed. Instead, they flipped on their high beams, making it uncomfortable to drive, and rode my tailgate. At this point, I thought I was going to be pulled over by the police. I drove a white Ford sedan and had just called out a different white Ford sedan, so I grabbed my registration from my glove box. Suddenly, the car behind me audibly slammed on the brakes and stopped in the middle of the highway. They must have shut off their car because the lights went out and I saw what looked like the same Ford sedan from earlier. Still, I thought this may have been a police car. They had a roof rack, and it could have looked like I had reached for a gun in my glove box or something. I panicked and called 911 for the second time and asked the dispatcher if they had sent a cruiser to investigate. The dispatcher was a little curt with me and assured me that they sent somebody out. Dispatcher, we have sent a trooper out to find the car, sir. Me, I only ask because somebody is following me and acting weird. It could be a cop, but I think I freaked them out by getting my registration. Dispatcher, are you pulled over? Me, no, they didn't turn on the lights. Dispatcher, let me try to get the trooper we sent out. As she was talking, the car again sped towards me and stopped inches from my bumper. Again, their high beams were on and again they slammed their brakes. I told the dispatcher, I'm pretty sure this is not the police behind me. The car sped to my bumper again and turned their high beams on, this time laying on the horn. Hearing this, the dispatcher asked me what was happening. Dispatcher, what's happening? Did you honk? Me, that's the car behind me. I don't think it's a cop. Dispatcher, I'll try to get the trooper again, but I don't think that's him behind you. For some reason, this is what shook me. Before that, I was thinking I would get pulled over and maybe get a ticket. Up until then, I was going to the speed limit and trying to avoid getting pulled over. I told the dispatcher, I don't care if I get pulled over, I'm speeding, and if they put their lights on, then I'll pull over. I started to accelerate and the person behind me just kept up with me. The speed limit was 55 and they kept on my bumper the entire time, but this time they were swerving. I tried to signal for an exit then bail on it, but they followed. At the next exit, I took the off-ramp and continued onto the on-ramp, and the car behind me followed the whole time. I thought about trying to go to a Wawa gas station, but the dispatcher and I thought that it would be unsafe. She was calm and talking to another person trying to send police to me. The other person, maybe a supervisor, asked if I could drive to the state police station. Realizing that I was one exit away, I told her I was coming there and she said that she would have troopers meet me outside. As I pulled off to the exit, the car followed me. I blew a few red lights trying to get to the police station, and the car tried to pull into the other lane to pass me or pull up alongside me. Once the police station was in view, I put on my turn signal and the car slammed on its brakes again, turned off their lights, and turned into a parking lot. The story ends kind of anticlimactically as I pulled into the police station and met the troopers. Two of them went to find the car and I stayed with the third trooper. I think the dispatcher and her supervisor and the state trooper escorted me home after taking a statement from me. I was never called to follow up or testify, so I can only assume the person didn't get caught. I don't drink as a general rule, but once a month or so I'll go out with friends and binge. My friends and I had a great night at a bar in the city and they left. I was chatting up a cute guy, so I decided to stay. I went back to his place. After post-coitus, I'm ready to head home, so I call an Uber to pick me up. I don't know where I am, I know the city I'm in, but not my exact location. I ordered the Uber, but it's taking forever, so I cancel it and try again. Pretty soon a car pulls up. I drunkenly mumble something like, "Is this the Uber?" and I hop in. Mistake. Ubers apparently are supposed to have some kind of marking on their vehicle. The guy pulls away and starts driving. We're chatting, I'm fumbling for a cigarette, and the next thing I notice is that we're headed for the highway, but in the opposite direction of where I thought we needed to drive, and we're going at a solid 90 miles per hour. Then I get a call from an Uber driver. He's there and I'm not, because I'm in the car with someone else. I start texting my friend frantically, counting off mile markers for her. Then I realize that's going to do jack, because she's probably drunk too, so I call 911, but I realize this guy is crazy. He's refusing to let me out of the car, so I've got to do it on the sly. It's been about 40 minutes now. I'm terrified. I don't know where I am. I don't know who this is. We're driving at over 100 miles per hour, weaving in and out of traffic. This guy is trying to get me to hang up my phone call, and also smoking pot, so I don't want to do anything that might provoke a violent reaction from him. I start chatting to the 911 dispatcher as if it's my friend, praying that they'll catch on. "Hey girl, it's me. Yeah, I'm with someone right now. We're driving past highway exit." "No sweetie, it's not my Uber. I thought it was, but it's not. It's a shame you can't come and meet me and bring friends." Thankfully, the operator catches on. He gets me to stay on the phone while he sends cops, and we develop a code. If I see cops, I'm supposed to casually put my hand out the window, which looks semi-normal because I'm smoking a cigarette. We pull into some random little housing complex, and he busts out some powder and forms two lines. I now have confirmation that he does drugs, which means he's probably emotionally volatile. I relay this to the operator in code, "Oh girl, I wish you were here right now. This guy just busted out the coke. You'd love it. He's taken a really big bump. Man after my own heart," etc. Pretty soon I can see the lights from the cop car, so I start waving my hand out the window. At this point, I don't care if he's on to me or not. I don't know if he has a weapon, but I slump down on my seat just in case things get hot. The cops surround us, get him out of the car, and then, once it's safe, they extricate me as well. They whisk me to the hospital for a drug test and evaluation, and that's where my story ends. On my way to the hospital, as I'm explaining all of this to the officer, I find out that of the guy's 40-ish years on this earth, he's been in federal prison for 30 of them, for violent offenses. I want people to learn from my mistakes, and if nothing else, call 911 and stay on the line. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. For background, I'm a 24-year-old woman living in Australia and work at an establishment that caters for an adult audience. One night, as my shift is coming to a close, one of the patrons asked me to buy a drink, which I accept because employer policy. I talk him up to a couple of expensive drinks for the two of us, have a quick conversation, and make my excuses about my shift being over, but he should come back to see me soon. He starts to gaze at me and it feels uncomfortable. He stands up and with his creepy grin asks to walk me to my car. I know never to put myself in that position and politely decline, and I tell him I might see him next time. I walk out past our biggest bouncer and the guy doesn't follow me. Great, nothing extraordinary, just standard par for the course of my profession. But sadly, this isn't where our story ends. For this creep, it's only just the beginning. I'm off for a week after that night, but when I come back into work, I'm told a patron has been coming in every night for the last week asking for me. Says he wants to buy me another drink. Naively, I think, oh great, a bigger pay this week, and get set for my shift. The night rolls on and who should roll in but our man of the hour, and he asks for me. So I saunter over and he buys me a drink. The whole thing I'm sitting there with him, he just has this creepy grin on his face. Not like a normal creepy grin, that's just normal. No, this is the kind of grin where he knows something you don't and is very pleased with himself about that fact. So we're talking and I'm getting him ordering himself drinks and trying to upsell him where I can. About half an hour goes by and I make my excuses to leave so I can try to spread the tips around. But this guy isn't having it. He won't let me leave, and the more I insist, the angrier he gets. He's practically hissy at me by the time I give a look to one of the bouncers, who promptly comes over and diffuses the situation, giving me an opportunity to walk away. Great, crisis averted. Wrong. Bouncer doesn't throw him out, just gives me a buffer so this guy starts following me around the place, even attempting to walk into an employee-only area, which is where another bouncer finally notices and kicks him out. I finish my shift and walk over to my car. There he is, I kid you not, sitting on the bonnet of my car. How he knew it was my car I will never know. He wants me to give him a ride and tells me how pretty I look. He's spewing greasy slimeball creep lines at this point and I'm not interested. I try to give him a hint nicely and decline to give him a ride, but again he just turns to me and grabs me by my arm, insisting I give him a ride. I tell him to screw off and jam my key in his shoulder as hard as I can. He lets go and I push him with all my might so he falls down. I jump in my car, lock the door, and shove that key in the ignition. He's back up and banging on the window angrily to let him in. And I mean hard, so hard I think his hands or my window might break. I gun the accelerator and I'm out of there. When I get 5 minutes down the road and I'm sure I'm not being followed, I pull over to the side of the road and call back to work. I tell them what's happened and alert them that the other girls need to be careful leaving tonight. As I hang up the phone, I break into tears. I eventually compose myself, pull back onto the road and head home. I cry myself to sleep. Next morning, word has gotten around and owner calls me to make sure I'm okay. I assure him I am, but he insists I take some time off in case this creep comes back. He wants to put some distance between us. Makes sense. A week goes by, then 2, he's coming in every night asking about me and being told I quit and don't work there anymore. I lie to get him to stop coming in, you know, but he just keeps coming in and asking, clearly not buying it, and then suddenly 2.5 weeks in, he stops. Great, I am really needing money at this point, so I'm happy to be able to go back to work the following week. Time goes on and everything seems to go back to normal. Same old chances, but the good kind that leads to higher paychecks. Abusive guy doesn't come back in, I'm happy. I start being forgetful though. I think I leave a door closed when I leave the house, but it's open when I get back. Lights on or off, food left out, things ending up in different places than I remember putting them sometimes moments before. I'm losing it, but it's probably just the stress of everything that's gone down. One of my close friends who works with me reassures me that it's normal after being grabbed like that and it will pass. This keeps up for a month until one day I head out to work, get 15 minutes down the road and realize I forgot some clothes I'll need that night at work. I head back home only to find the lights in my front room on and the TV visible as on from the outside. I really am losing it. Good thing I came back, I guess. I head inside, grab my stuff, make sure to turn the TV off and the light out and head to the door. Suddenly I freeze. There standing blocking the door is the creep that grabbed me. I'm stunned, jaw dropped on the floor. Then after what seems like a lifetime of standing in silence staring at each other, him smiling, I scream what the, I'm screaming for him to get out and ask him what he's doing here, how he knows where I lived, all in one jumbled mouthful of confusion. He just stands there with that smile on his face while I'm loudly freaking out but stupidly not moving. I start gasping for air in a mixture of panic attack and bewilderment, then he decides to speak in my wake. The words ooze out of him and leave me chilled. Welcome home, honey, you're back early. A switch goes off in my head, I throw everything I have on me at him and sprint to the back door. I'm out ski. I leg it faster than I have in my life, screaming bloody murder as I go. I hide in some bushes around the corner, tears running down my face, gasping for air. I check my pocket and my keys are still there. No phone though, I threw that at the stalker creep along with everything else. I sneak back to my house, jump in my car and nope out of there. I head to work, tell them what's happened and call the cops. Cops head to my house and send others to my work. Stalker guy is gone, but when they turn up, they search the house and turns out he's been living in my crawl space. I'm paranoid that's what all those doors and lights and misplaced things was about. I pack up whatever I can fit in my car while cops are still there, that they'll let me take, and I drive. Haven't been back since. I moved states, knew everything. This happened around 2006, when I was in my mid-20s and my sister, the unfortunate main character in the story, had just turned 21. At the time, she and her boyfriend lived with my fiance and I. On weekends, we went out to one of the 2 bars that had karaoke, air hockey, etc. This particular night, we were at the bar further out from where we lived in the city, a good half an hour by car. Everyone was having drinks, socializing with people we knew. It was one of those places, lots of regulars, singing karaoke, nothing out of the ordinary really, except that night my sister started hanging out with these two older ladies who had a liquor store in their purses, and were quite sharing, although I didn't know it at the time. As she tended to drink a lot more than me, that was a score for her. Less money spent on drinks, but she ended up far more hammered than usual. Towards the end of the night, around 1:45, she was really very drunk. The aforementioned fiance, my sister's boyfriend, and I were in a heated air hockey game, planning to leave as soon as it was over. She walked up to us and said she was going to smoke a cigarette outside. Nothing unusual, everyone did until we were done. About 5 minutes later, we paid our tab and walked out, but she was not on the porch area where smokers congregated. Okay, weird, but not alarming. We went out back of the bar to check for her, inside in the restroom in the large parking lot. It is notable that this particular bar was in a business park, so there were multiple businesses that were closed, as well as the Mexican restaurant next door that had just closed as well. We searched, asked everyone that knew us and those who didn't if they had seen her. No one had. I asked the workers from the restaurant that were sitting outside as well. They seemed nervous when telling me they hadn't seen her, but I didn't think on that much until later. By then I was in a full-on panic after trying to call her cell about 15 times only to have it go to voicemail. Being a bit inebriated myself, I started searching for her. Went as far as to take off my heels and start running down the highway searching for her, as honestly there had been times she would start walking home in the past, though never from this place as it was so far away from where we lived. The fiance and her boyfriend thought we should go to the house to see if she got someone to bring her home. Seemed unlikely but not unheard of. We get home and she's nowhere to be found. Just as we were about to head back and I was going to phone the police, I received a call from the PD on my phone. They indicated that they had my sister, that there had been an incident, and I needed to get down there. We rushed to the PD where we were taken into a room with my sister. Her face was red from obvious crying and bruises were starting to show on her arms and chest. She said that when she told us she was going outside, she thought we said we were leaving then, so she walked to the car. After a few minutes being drunk and tired, she sat down up against it to wait. A van pulled up and a young man was asking her directions to somewhere. She walked closer to try to explain when suddenly the back door flew open and two other men grabbed her and threw her in, taking off. They were rough with her, hitting her a few times while holding her down, saying they only wanted money. They snatched her purse from her, breaking the straps and searched it, quite haphazardly as they didn't find the $30 she had in it. After driving around a bit speaking in Spanish, she couldn't understand they pulled out a gun, making sure she saw it and put a bandana around her eyes, telling her that they'd let her go. She was driven to some woods by a neighborhood she did not know. The door was opened and they pushed her out, telling her to run, that if she took the blindfold off or turned around, they'd shoot. She ran and ran. Eventually she did take the blindfold off and came to the first door she saw, beating on it and screaming for help. The police were called, she was picked up, and now we are back to my being there, hearing what I feared had happened. Report filed, police did a search and did locate the bandana she ripped off, but as she was so intoxicated and terrified, she was not able to give a clear description of the van other than white older model or the three occupants other than young Hispanic men. The investigation turned up nothing as no cameras caught any of this. We even had detectives in our home who said, look, we need the truth. If you got drunk and just went home with someone and didn't want your boyfriend to find out, we will file charges against you. Aside from the bruises, broken person, or trauma, there was nothing concrete to go on. That was unpleasant. I am still fairly convinced someone at the restaurant knew something given their suspicious behaviors when I asked about her, but the police were never able to find that link. All said and done, the guys were never found. Eventually we just moved on, in different states. It's now just a story in our lives. It still makes me sick thinking of what could have happened, but thankfully it didn't. A little backstory, I was about 16 at the time, and I rode the public bus to and from school. This particular day, I had done some special effects makeup before the end of my classes, so I had fake blood running down my face, and I couldn't be bothered to take it off before leaving school. Now I knew as I was boarding my bus, people would stare or ask questions, so I wasn't surprised when this man, who looked to be in his mid-30s, started asking about the makeup. The conversation was normal at first, just the usual, oh wow, did you do that yourself, kind of stuff. I answered the questions as normally as I would, and expected the conversation to be done and over with. But I was wrong. This man, he mentioned his name was Joe, started steering the conversation into strange territory, asking me if I had a boyfriend, to which I lied and said I did. He then proceeded to ask if my boyfriend liked the makeup and if I was on my way to see him now. I again lied and said he likes the makeup and yes, I was going to see him, trying to get Joe to believe someone was expecting me. The conversation died down for a bit until he said this, you know, you remind me a lot of my sister, he said with a grin. I just smiled in response, not really knowing what to say. After not hearing anything from me, Joe continued, "My sister was kind of a jerk. She was always lying about me to our parents. I had fantasies about breaking her jaw. Now at this point I was terrified. My bus stop was still another 20 minutes away, and I just wanted to be out of that situation. Seeing that what he said made me uncomfortable, he switched the subject, telling me about where he worked and what he does there. I just nodded along to what he was saying, remaining silent the entire time. Closer to my bus stop, he says to me, "Why don't you come to my house? I have a freezer full of pizza and ice cream. Maybe we can hang out for a while." To which I politely declined, saying my boyfriend was expecting me. Finally, I get to my bus stop and quickly get off the bus, speed walking all the way home, all the while calling a friend to inform them of what happened. Things were fine for a bit after that. I switched my bus route so I wouldn't run into him again. But one afternoon, I had to go to a store that was on my old route. I was nervous about getting on that bus again, but was happy when I didn't see Joe. I did my shopping, and as I was leaving the store, I saw Joe standing out by the door staring at me. The second I was out the doors, he walked over to me, a grin on his face, and wrapped his arms around me. I pulled away from him, telling him I was very busy and had to go. He then asked, "Well, what are you doing? I have time, I can tag along." I was very persistent, saying I really couldn't, I had to go, and I walked away, heading into a neighboring store that I knew would be busy. Sure enough, Joe followed. I ignored him as I made my way down a heavily populated makeup aisle, keeping my attention on some cheap lipsticks in the hopes he'd get the hint and leave me alone. I was wrong. Joe reached over my shoulder, grabbing a red lipstick as he leaned in close and whispered, "This color would look gorgeous on you. I can't wait to see you wearing it." He then placed the lipstick in my basket and walked away, leaving the store. I remained in the store for about 20 minutes after he left, afraid to leave and make the walk home. After I mustered up the courage, I put the lipstick back, put away the basket, and called a friend to stay on the line with me until I made it home. Now I don't know if he followed me home or not, but I can say that after that day, the motion detector porch lights started coming on at night, and I started hearing knocks at my bedroom window. Thankfully, I moved shortly after and haven't seen Joe since. This happened 2 summers ago while I was house sitting out in California for an older couple I had met at a conference for work. It had seemed like a dream scenario. The couple wanted to vacation in Hawaii for 2 weeks, but didn't want to board their cats, and I had been chatting with them about wanting to visit California again, where they happened to live, because I had loved it for the first time I went, and we figured that we could mutually benefit if I came out and house sat for them. So I flew out there, and they showed me around for a few days, taught me how to take care of the cats, 2 of them, one that was extremely shy and I barely saw, which is important later, and their plants, gave me access to their house and cars. These people were so generous, and before I knew it, I had dropped them off at the airport and I was on my own. At first, it was really the dream vacation. I was staying in Oakland and making forays into San Francisco, Sonoma, Monterey. In the mornings, I could walk out the front door and shortly be hiking the paths surrounding nearby Mount Diablo, and I was just ultra content with the world. I was so enamored by the area that I had actually started looking into taking some steps to relocate out there even. But then one day, about halfway through my final week there, when I got back to the house, I felt really odd, almost like I shouldn't go inside. I shook it off and went inside anyway, because it was getting late and I needed to put out dinner for the cats. Once I was inside, I forced myself to ignore how off I felt, and I made some food for myself, went to bed, and was shocked to find the shy cat hiding under my bed and crying. This was the first time I had ever seen her close up. The entire time I had been there up to that point, she never left my host's bedroom unless she didn't realize I was around. Again, I ignored feeling weird and just assumed she had decided I was okay and went to bed. I did start locking my bedroom door that night though. I also remembered that about halfway through that night, I thought I heard someone walking around in the gravel outside my window, but after listening for a bit, I didn't hear anything else and went back to sleep. The day after, in the morning, I still felt a little odd, but kept up with my plans for the day. I drove out to a little musical festival in Sonoma and went clothes shopping and had an overall great day. When I got back to the house though, I found the front door locked in a way that I hadn't left it. Basically, my host never locked the deadbolt, only the lower second lock, and that's the only lock my key worked on, so I never messed with the deadbolt, but it was definitely locked. So I had to call my host and find the hide key, which, to their credit safety-wise, was buried like a whole foot underneath a bush outside and had definitely not been unearthed for a long time. So I used that, went inside, and kept the key with me just in case it happened again. And it did, but with a different door. This time I had stepped out into the garage to get a drink, and when I turned around to go back into the house, the door was shut and locked. I could use my normal key on that door, but I was still getting pretty bewildered. My own cats are whack, so I think in my mind I was trying to come up with a way that the cats could be locking me out the house, but I was coming up empty. I decided I must have been misunderstanding how the locks worked and just wrote it off and started checking and triple checking locks when I went out of the house or into the garage. That night when I went to bed, the really awful feeling of unease was still there, and so was the shy cat, who was clearly unhappy to see me, but also wouldn't leave my room. But again, I just locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. The next morning I felt awful, nausea, body ache. I had no desire to leave the house, so I decided to stay in and Netflix for a day. This vacation stay was like a full 2 weeks, so I didn't feel like I was in any hurry to get all the touristy things in anyways. But as the days went on, I started to feel that feeling of wrongness again, and it morphed into feeling incredibly watched. Around mid-afternoon, it got to the point that I was so uneasy that, even feeling awful, I decided to get out of the house for a bit to shake it off. I was getting a bit low on food, so I went to the grocery store and bought a couple food items that I didn't think would hurt my stomach, and then I left. When I got to my car, I started crying and my entire body was telling me not to drive back to the house. I couldn't not though, because I didn't want to neglect the cats, so I drove back, parked in the driveway, and convinced myself after about half an hour to just go open the front door. Once I did that, I thought I would get over it and would be able to go in and at least feed the cats, and then maybe I'd go get a hotel room after, but my body physically would not let me inside. It was like I was stuck in the entryway. I then made a deal with myself. I would yell into the house saying I had already called the police and that they were on their way. In panic logic, I figured that would make anyone in the house leave, so I faced the inside of the house, looking down the hallway towards the bedrooms, and I did just that. The second I had finished saying, "They're almost here, so if you want to avoid being arrested, you need to leave now," the light in my host room turned on and I heard some banging. I immediately hightailed it back to the car, called the police for real, and proceeded to have a mental breakdown while talking to the dispatcher. Once they got there, they checked the house and didn't find anyone. The double doors in my host's bedroom were left wide open. I'm so glad the cats didn't get out, and there was a pile of food wrappers in the corner behind the blinds, so they said it looked like someone had been there. What makes it so scary to me is that nothing was taken, and that based on the shape of the house, that would have been the perfect vantage point to see me in the living room as I stayed home sick. To explain this, the house was in an L shape, and from the windows into the garden that were in my host's bedroom, you could see into the living room windows. Also, the minute the police were gone, they said they couldn't prove anyone was there, there were no signs of forced entry, and we couldn't get a hold of my host immediately to verify if anything had been taken, etc., which once they were back, they verified that nothing had been taken, so they said they'd patrol a bit but nothing else. The shy cat was right back into my host's bedroom and I didn't see her again until I left to go back home. So basically, I think the intruder had been there at least 2 days, forcing her to choose between two strangers and leading her to choose the one that was at least a little less strange, me. It messed me up pretty bad, especially because they didn't catch the person and didn't seem to have any desire to look, and I still had to stay in that house for the next 3 days. Nothing else odd happened and I didn't feel off the rest of the time I was there, but the damage was done. I've never felt completely safe in a home without doing a complete search before bed since, but I am extremely glad my gut spoke up. I guess I'd rather have some residual anxiety than be dead. So about 5 years ago, I, male 26 years old, set out to travel the world. Being straight out of college had left me dead, ever more desperate for any job I was overqualified for, and generally depressed. I felt isolated and alone in my small town in Washington and found the only way to get out, travel. My high school buddy suggested I look into COMPILATIon and volunteering as a way to travel cheap, and so I did. The way it works is quite simple. You work for around 25 hours a week on some farm for food and housing. The draw is that since the community of cheap travelers is quite big, it is a great way to meet new people, get outside of your comfort zone and just let yourself live and figure life out. Fast forward 8 months and I'm a seasoned cow patty shoveler. I started out in Washington, Oregon, and went south to California. There, I was able to save some money I was paid under the table for some extra work and was now faced with a decision, where to go in the world. The excitement of being able to purchase a ticket to almost anywhere in the world got the best of me, and on the advice of my volunteering partner, I chose it at random. I went to a randomizer website and clicked the country button, Georgia. The country of Georgia. To say I didn't know anything about it was an understatement, but the fear of the unknown made it exciting and exotic somehow, and so I did it. I purchased a ticket and started browsing for a farm that could host me. There were a few options, and most were remote and hadn't even had an internet connection. I messaged every single one because few ever respond, and got a response from one farm on top of a mountain. The pictures showed a traditional Georgian stone house with a large garden out in the back, a family with several cheerful children, grandparents having dinner, animals. It seemed warm and inviting. The description was written in good English, and the requirements for work seemed reasonable. I was excited. After I flew into Tbilisi, the capital, I followed the instructions that they have sent to locate the farm, which wasn't an easy task. Few in Georgia speak English, the roads are screwed since few have been maintained since the fall of the Soviet Union, and the country is generally poor. It took me around 20 hours of Soviet buses and taxis, weird serpentine roads and paths to get to the desired blue pin on my map. It was a dirt path leading up a steep hill into a national park up in the north of the country. There was nothing for miles on end but trees and their silence. As I got up that hill, I saw the house about half a mile away on even a steeper hill, surrounded by the trees. From that viewpoint, it seemed abandoned, overgrown, brown, and dreary. As I walked past the gate, Geary, fake name, the apparent owner, approached me. He was a heavy, small, middle-aged guy with a big smile on his face. He shook my hand and in broken English started to show me around. He also smelled of booze. As he was showing me around, I noticed that there wasn't anyone there but us. I asked about his wife and kids and he brushed that aside and said something to the extent, "They're away right now." By this point, I am creeped out. From browsing around, it was apparent that the farm was in deep decline. Apple trees and crops were dying, the roof of the small barn caved in, and the house itself full of trash and smelling of mold. It was obvious that Geary was going through a rough patch, but I wasn't going to turn around and just leave in the middle of nowhere, without a plan, having not slept for the past 36 hours. It was evening, and after feeding me well and trying as best as he could to hold a conversation in English, Geary showed me my room on the second floor and I went to sleep. I almost immediately blacked out from the exhaustion and stress, and would have slept for 10 hours if I wasn't awoken by a strange noise in the middle of the night. It sounded like something metallic and heavy was being dragged across the wooden floor. In that sleepy in-between state, I listened to it for a few minutes, thought nothing of it, and went back to sleep once it stopped. In the morning, Geary, now sober and grumpy, asked me to repair some of the windows and doors in the house as he himself planned to go and fetch some components in a nearby village. Again, I got this weird feeling creeping down my spine. Something wasn't right. He didn't maintain eye contact and was evasive. There was no cell reception, no internet. Once he left, I checked around the house to get a general idea of the place, and it became apparent that the place was hardly ever lived in, like one of those abandoned houses. There was broken furniture, newspapers, and old photos on the floor, a shattered mirror. I took my phone and looked through the saved listing again. The photos didn't match neither the backyard, the garden, or the walls. Geary wasn't in any of them. It was a completely different house. Now by this point, I am full-blown panicking. I pack my stuff and start to leave when I see a group of 3 men going up that first hill. There aren't any other paths I can take, so I go behind the house and rush down this hill into the forest. After some time I stop and listen. I hear them in the house. They're clearly looking for me. Afraid of making any noise, I remain still, hidden behind a bush. I don't know how long I wait, but they were persistent. At some point I hear them leave, so I count until some large number and proceed back into the house and path, and once I find it's all clear, I book the heck out of there. Never ran this fast. But I am still in the middle of nowhere. No traffic, no public transport. I reached a paved road and start walking in the general direction from where I remember coming. Hours go by and finally a car drives by and stops. It was a really nice Russian family that gave me a ride to town. The listing disappeared from the website a few days later I left, and I haven't heard from Geary since. I've yet to make sense of that experience. I have traveled since and volunteered too, and have yet to have an experience like that again, but I trust my gut feeling something was really not right. More than a few years ago, I was working as a burlesque entertainer in a gentleman's club. It was idly sitting at the end of the bar one night when a couple came in. Not unusual. I had no contact with them and thought nothing of their being there until later. A few days after that night, the doorman handed me a piece of paper that had 2 names and phone numbers written on it, Laura and Richard. I was supposed to call one of them, so I called Laura, who told me they had been the couple who'd been at the bar the other night, and they noticed me and thought I'd be perfect for a part in a movie Richard was producing. Would I be up for a meeting? Of course I would, who wouldn't? I was told Richard would pick me up the next night at 7 and to wear something wild. 7 o'clock came the next evening and I was ready in a white lace dress with ostrich feather trim when Richard showed up outside my building, so I went down, introduced myself, and got in the car. We agreed to go to a local bar I knew well from the meeting, but first we had to go back to his place so he could pick up some contracts he'd forgotten, so off we went. He went in the house and came back out with a few manila envelopes and an open bottle of beer, a brand that I didn't drink. Plus, it's against the law to drink alcohol in a vehicle here, so I stuck the beer into the window well of his Jeep and we went to the bar. At the bar, he showed me what were supposedly scripts from this movie he was producing. In some contracts, it looked pretty legit. Richard was very nice and I was interested. I'd made some plans to go out later with my soon-to-be boyfriend, so I excused myself to go call him on the bar's payphone, and took my Corona that I'd ordered at the bar with me to the bank of phones. As a dancer, I'd been taught by the other older girls to never let your drink out of sight. My boyfriend wanted to get going to another club, so I went back to the table where Richard was and told him I had to go. He didn't like that and tried a few different things to get me to go to the movie set with him, saying I could meet Mickey Rourke and check out the set, but all I really wanted to do was meet my boyfriend, so I declined, took Richard's card, and left. I never heard from Richard again, but a couple of months later, the police came around to the bar I was working at. They had 2 big books of mugshots and a stack of Polaroids with them, and they wanted to talk to all of us about a predator couple who had been setting up meetings with dancers by saying they were in the film industry, then drugging them. They showed me the 2 mugshot books and asked if I saw anyone I recognized in the pictures, and I immediately identified Richard and Laura. They then showed me the Polaroids, which were trophy pictures of the couple in the act of attacking the poor drug girls, and asked if I knew any of the victims and where they might find them, in order to talk to the girls. I only knew a couple of women in the photographs, but there were a lot that this had happened to. Richard and Laura were prosecuted. He went to jail, but she didn't because she was from a wealthy family and she also turned witness on him. About 12 years after Richard was convicted, I saw in the newspaper that he was up for a possibility of parole, so I wrote a letter to the parole board telling this story and urging them not to let him back out because he's a dangerous offender who should have to stay in prison for the entirety of his sentence. If I had drank that open beer he had handed me in his Jeep on the way to that meeting, I wouldn't have made it to the meeting and would probably have ended up in that stack of Polaroids. Girls and guys, always keep your eye on your drinks. Have fun, but be careful out there. So this happened about a year and a half ago. I moved to Los Angeles 3 years ago. First time living on my own and I love it. Even with everything that happened, I still love living here. So I'm a smoker, on average about 3 to 4 cigarettes a day. So thankfully I'm only at a pack, like every 5 or 6 days, whatever. Math isn't my strong suit. Anyway, I live in a non-smoking building, so I have to step outside when I want to smoke. The first time I saw this guy, he was outside my building, sitting next to a dumpster. No big deal, probably just another neighbor I hadn't met. His name is Oz. The first time I saw Oz, I was having a cigarette outside, and he just glanced over at me every once in a while, but that's it. 2 days later, it's like 11:30 p.m. and I'm heading downstairs to smoke. I look at the lobby of the building and see someone underneath a blanket behind some chairs. I see a cord going behind the blanket bulge, so I immediately assume someone's in the doghouse for the night and charging their phone. I have my smoke, head back upstairs, and go to sleep. A week later, it's the middle of the day. I've gotten some work done and decided to take a smoke break. I go and sit outside like I always do. Oz is sitting outside as well. This time he's got some paperwork with him. A lot of paperwork. At this point, I feel like I should provide a description of Oz. He's about 6 feet tall, early to mid-30s. He has medium length hair that has been styled into dreadlocks. A full but short beard, if that makes sense. He was wearing worn down pants and jackets. Based on his face, he seemed like he cleaned himself up regularly, but his clothes made him look homeless, and sadly he was. So Oz is going over the paperwork in his hands when he looks over at me and says hi, so I responded kind. He then asked me how I'm doing today. I'm doing pretty okay, I respond. How are you? I'm good, man, I'm good. Good. It's a nice day, right? Yeah, it is. So when are you moving? Now that question came out of nowhere. Was he hoping to find a new place to live? Was he trying to move into this building? Was that what his paperwork was all about? I mean, if he's moving into a new apartment, great. I hope life works out well for him. But why was he asking me when I'm moving out? I know the building at the time had a vacancy or two, so if he was going to move in, why ask a question like that? Why make it sound like he's waiting for someone to move out so he can have a spot? My brain asked all those questions in less than a second of Oz asking me that. After a couple seconds of being stunned by Oz's question, I just said, I'm not moving anytime soon, man. My cigarette was over by then, so it was time for me to go to my apartment. Another week later, I go see a friend stand up set, and when I get back to my apartment at like 10 p.m., I see 2 police SUVs outside my building with lights on. I go inside because if there are 2 police vehicles already there, I can't do anything, so might as well stay out of the way. The cops are talking to one of my downstairs neighbors, and I can't catch anything they're talking about. 2 days later, notices have been put up next to the mailboxes that say, this man is not allowed in this building, and it has a photo of Oz. Turns out the blanket bulge I saw was actually Oz, when he somehow managed to get inside the building and sleep in the lobby with an electric blanket. A couple of months go by and I don't see Oz. I honestly forgot about him by that point. When finally one day, Oz is there again, sitting outside the building with somehow even more paperwork. This time when he sees me, he's almost immediately hostile. So when are you getting out of here? What? I want my apartment back, man. I don't know what you're talking about. You stole my apartment and I want it back. I was so confused by this. I snuffed my cigarette out and went back into the building. This exchange pretty much repeated itself every few days for the next 2 weeks, each time making me more and more uncomfortable. On weekdays, I would get home very late, like anywhere between 11:30 p.m. and 2 a.m. Oz never had a predictable pattern to his appearances, so I started getting really nervous about going home. Like, I wanted to avoid going home so I could avoid being accosted by Oz. Finally, one Saturday after lunch, I step outside and have a smoke. Oz is there, and this time he's mad. He's saying that if I don't get out of his apartment by the end of the day, he'll get me. That shook me up a lot. I got back inside and stayed there. Around midnight, I decided to step outside and have a smoke, hoping against hope that Oz isn't there, but lo and behold, Oz is there. Wizard. He's sitting by the dumpster again, and I go to the opposite direction to inhale smoke. I see Oz go up to the stoop and stand in front of the door to the building. Great. When my cigarette is done, I head to the stairs to get into my building. Oz steps to block me from getting to the door. Excuse me, I say as I try to go past him, but he stops me. You ain't getting in here, he says. Why? Because you don't live here. Yes, I do. No, you don't, man. You don't live here. Yeah, I do live here. Now please move out of my way. Maybe if I stay kind, he'll let me go home, but no, he doubled down. Nah, man, you can't get in here because you don't live here. For the last last time I live here. Prove it, man. You got paperwork? Yes, I have a lease. Where? I was getting really irritated at this point, so my answers started becoming really cold. Like I was getting pretty rude to this guy. I don't carry it with me everywhere I go. Now move aside and let me in. No, now you need to get out of here. Move. Nah, now you need to get out of here or I'm calling my security team. No, you need to move or I'm calling the cops. Do it, man. My security guys are already on their way. They're gonna screw you up. At this point, I was already stepping away from the door and pulling out my phone. I called the non-emergency number because in the moment I didn't feel threatened by Oz, but I should have called regular dispatch instead of non-emergency. Cops got there about half an hour later and Oz was still there. The cops came and got out of their car. One cop was holstering their nightstick and dropped it on the ground, then holstered it properly. The two cops that showed up separated and talked to Oz and I separately. I tell my cop that I was just trying to get back into my building. He's blocking me. He's been harassing me lately saying I need to move out. Oz, however, had a very different story. He claimed that I stole his apartment from him, stole his credit cards, and stole his insurance payouts. The apartment he claimed I stole from him isn't the apartment I live in. The cherry on top of this lack of a sundae is the part where he accused me of throwing dog water on him. An actual water bottle filled with a mixture of dog spit and water. That's the guess I have as to what dog water is. First he claimed I threw it up at him while I was standing on the sidewalk and he was on the stoop. Then he claimed I was on the fire escape above him and literally poured the water on him from above. Thankfully the cops knew immediately that this was a lie, but because I guess no actual crime had been committed, all they could do was tell Oz to go away. He was not happy about it, but he did. I hoped that Oz would not come back after that, but sadly I was wrong. Oz did come back just one last time. A few days later, it's the middle of the day and I'm walking downstairs to inhale fire. As I step outside, I see two cops, Oz and one of my downstairs neighbors. Oz and my neighbor are separated and giving statements to the cops. When my neighbor is done, his name is John. I go up to him and ask him what happened. John then shows me his elbows, both scraped up and lightly bleeding. One of his knees is also lightly cut up. Oz also had a couple of bruises and light cuts on him. John tells me that as he was trying to enter the building earlier, Oz was standing right outside and tried to force his way in. John stopped him and tried to tell him to leave. The two got into a small fight and the cops were called. I decide to sit outside with John while everything is being figured out and while John is waiting for his wife, a nurse, to get home and look him over. The manager of the building is called and helps the cops to look at the security camera footage for the front of the building. After looking at it for about 10 minutes, the cops and manager return. Sadly, the fight took place outside of view of the cameras, so it became a case of he said, so all the cops can do is tell Oz to leave once again. Since then, I have not seen Oz anywhere near my building, and a sign has been put up outside the building stating, "This building is not open to the public, no unauthorized entry," which is both comforting and disconcerting. This event took place quite a few years ago, so unfortunately I don't remember everything that happened, but I remember nearly all of it. Anyways, this happened when I was around 4 to 5 years old and on Easter Sunday. My family always gathers at my grandmother's house to celebrate holidays, birthdays, etc. So as we do every holiday, my mother and I started our hour-long trip to her house. My mother prefers to live away from all the city commotion, which explains the long drive. We were probably around 20 minutes away from our destination when my mom noticed that we were a little low on gas, so we pulled into this old, almost rustic looking gas station with just a handful of customers inside. It was red and white with a few festive decorations outside and lots of Easter stickers on the two large glass windows that were on either side of the door. My mom, having taught me not to talk to strangers nor open the doors for anyone but her, trusted me enough to leave me in the car alone as she went inside briefly to pay for gas. She told me she would be right back before going into the gas station. It felt nice that day, so the windows in the car were down so we could feel the breeze while driving instead of the AC. While I was waiting on my mom, I remember adjusting the colorful paper clippings in my Easter basket next to me, then looking out of the backseat window. When I looked over, I saw a tall, older man, maybe around 30 or 40 years old, approaching my window. He crouched down slightly and looked at me. "Hi there, what's your name?" I remember him saying. At this moment, I remembered that I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers, so I told the man that my mom says I shouldn't speak to strangers. He then replied with, "Well, we could be friends then. My name's Charlie, and now that you know, I guess I'm not a stranger now, huh?" At the time, I thought he was right. In my mind, I thought, since a stranger is someone you don't know, this man wasn't a stranger anymore because I knew his name. The man and I had a short conversation that I don't quite remember. All I remember is him telling me that I had a nice Easter basket. At this point, I started to get a sick feeling in my stomach, but being a child, of course, I didn't know why. My mom then walked out of the gas station and noticed the man immediately and began approaching the car quickly, asking the man what he thinks he's doing. The man seems to panic and he pulls my door handle violently. He quickly realized that it was locked, thankfully, and proceeded to reach into my window and grab me by one of my wrists and attempt to pull me out. This obviously scared me a lot, causing me to panic and pull him against on instinct. This caused him to let go and take off running. My mom quickly ran to the car and I unlocked the doors. She grabbed me and pulled me me into an almost painful bear hug, then inspecting me closely, repeatedly asking if I was okay. I ended up with a slight bruise/redness on my arm where he grabbed me, but other than that I was just shaken up. The reality of what had just happened set in at this moment, and I remember just crying and holding onto my mom right after I said I was okay. I don't remember anything after this point, but I recently asked my mom about it and she said that she called the police immediately after. To this day, my mom still says that this was the most frightening moment of her life and claims that if she had gotten there any later and came back to an empty car, she wouldn't have been able to live with herself. I am a female and now 23. This happened around the time that I was 15 years old. Around this time it was my sophomore year in high school, so little backstory to help understand the story I'm about to tell. I was involved in my high school color guard. We are a part of band except we don't play instruments. We would spin colorful flags. We also use rifles and sabers in our performances. Around this time it was the fall and we were practicing our show, doing a lot of reruns to try and perfect it before our usual competitions. Normally practice would start at 4 and end almost at 9. Side note, I didn't live close to my high school like most people that went there. The drive would take at least 15 minutes max. Walking from my house to school would take an hour and taking the bus would take 45 minutes. My brother at this time worked late hours and my parents didn't get off of work until midnight, so my next best choice was the bus. The neighborhood wasn't the worst, but it also wasn't safe to be walking home at night. So on this night, I was saying goodbye to my friends and not wanting to bug them for a ride, I walked to my bus stop. I had my cell phone and started scrolling through Facebook. I would occasionally glance up and look at my surroundings. I noticed a car slowing down in front of my bus stop, but it immediately signaled to make a turn to my left. I didn't think much about it since there are houses behind that bus stop. It wasn't weird until I noticed this car doing that again and then again and again. I found this odd. It wasn't until he had basically passed by me for the 7th time that he finally parked on the curb by my bus stop. That's when I got a good look at him and that I took in his appearance. This happened a couple of years ago, so my memory isn't great, but I do remember he was Hispanic and reminded me a bit of an uncle of a friend of mine. He spoke his first words to me that sent me panicking. To translate what he said to me in Spanish, it was basically him saying, "Hey, come over here. Do you need a ride? Hop in, I'll take you." He kept saying that for a good 5 minutes and then suddenly drove off. I then let out a breath I didn't know I was holding in. I was trying to calm myself down and tell myself it was over, but I knew it wasn't and I was right. His car showed back up and the thing about my bus stop is that there is a house behind it, except before the house there is a good amount of space with just dirt. Cars can actually go in this space and I've seen it before. He parked behind my bus stop. At this moment I was already thinking about how to get out of the situation. I was frozen in place, not fight or flight but freezing. The worst thing to ever do. At this time this big guy was close by and was walking his pit bull on a leash. In my frozen state I knew this was my only chance and fought to get the words out. It was my only chance to save myself and I'm so glad I spoke out. "Excuse me, could you please stay with me? That man in the car right there won't leave me alone. I'm very scared. Please stand by my side." My words choked up and I was shaking at this point. The guy was kind-hearted and agreed. He stared down the man who at this point had his window up and began reversing. He drove off and the guy stayed with me till my bus came. At this time it was 9:59. I know that some of you might ask, why didn't you go back to your high school? Well, at this point no one was really there. Mostly everyone had been picked up. I had a cell phone but no one was going to be able to pick me up. This was my only transportation and that time I didn't know about Lyft or Uber. I'm not even sure if it was a thing back then. Overall, I'm just happy to have been saved by that kind-hearted guy. Because of him, I am here and able to share this story of mine. I'm still shaken up at the memory of it because of the scare it gave me. After that incident, I asked for a ride for the remaining of that season. Sometimes, even when you don't want to bug people with rides, it doesn't hurt to ask. It's better to be that annoying person than finding yourself in my situation. Stay safe when taking the bus at night. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I work evenings as a dispatcher in a medium-sized Midwestern city. I was driving home at 2 a.m. when I stopped for gas. In retrospect, it was stupid to have stopped at all. The gas station was poorly lit and completely empty of any other customers, but I knew the shady areas of town and this was not usually one of them. As I was pumping gas, I noticed a middle-aged woman sitting on the curb across the parking lot. It was a cold night and had just started raining. The woman was not wearing weather-appropriate clothing, so she was drenched. When the woman saw that I was watching her, she called out to me from across the parking lot. My second of many stupid decisions that night was choosing to engage with her. I was worried for her, so I approached her to see what sort of help I could offer. "Hi beautiful, I'm just trying to get home, but no one will help me," she said. "I'm trying to get to City A, but the cab ride is $60 and I only have $40. Can you help me?" I don't usually give money to panhandlers, but this woman seemed genuine. The weather was terrible and my job centers around helping people, so I agreed. I told her I didn't have any cash, but if she would come with me inside, I'd take some money out of the ATM and give her a few dollars. But the ATM wasn't wasn't working. I apologized and told her there was nothing else I could do for her. She followed me back outside, idly chatting with me as I opened my driver's door to get in, and then she got in my car. I was too shocked to really say anything. I sat staring at her as she buckled herself into the passenger seat. As soon as she got into my car, her demeanor changed entirely. She no longer seemed forlorn, as much as she did extremely excited and restless. "Just take me to my aunt's house," she said. "She can give me money." Of course, alarm bells are going off in my head. Although my first instinct is to tell her to get out of my car, my gut tells me that would be dangerous. She'd already proven to be unpredictable, she seemed to be high, and I didn't know if she had any weapons on her. Forcing her out of my vehicle, I thought, had the potential to elicit a violent reaction. "Where are you asking me to take you?" I finally said. "Just start driving, I'll tell you where to turn." "No, if you want me to consider driving you somewhere, I need you to tell me where we're going," I say, with no real intention of driving her anywhere. "Don't worry, honey, I'm not gonna rob you or nothing, just drive." "No," I repeated. "Where's your aunt's address?" "Okay, it's on Street A. What's the house number?" As I was asking her questions, she got really agitated. We still had not left the gas station parking lot. I considered getting out of the car and going into the gas station to help, but A, she had seemed to know and be friendly with one of the attendants that was inside when I tried to get money, and B, I wasn't about to leave her alone in my car. Finally, she snapped at me and said, "Why are you asking me so many questions? I thought we were friends. You don't trust me?" "I work at a police department," I said. "It's my job to ask these sort of questions." She flipped out. She started yelling at me about being a snitch, about trying to get her into trouble, just in general losing her mind. At this point, I'm more scared than ever. I just wanted her gone, but my instinct still told me asking her to get out of my car wouldn't work, so I decided to take a risk. "I'm not a police officer, I just work at a police department. Why don't I take you to Walmart and see if they have an ATM that works?" My idea was to get her out of my car as peacefully as possible, then lose her in the store. She liked my idea and immediately calmed down. I knew that driving off with this woman in my car was incredibly risky, but it seemed like the best option at the time. As we're driving, she keeps talking to me. Her thoughts were erratic, bouncing all over the place. It sometimes seemed difficult for her to follow through one thought, but this is roughly how our conversation went. "I'm glad we're friends now. I have about 5 or 6 people trying to get to me. I'm going to come to your work tomorrow so we can go arrest them together." "Okay, we can talk about that tomorrow. Tonight you said you're trying to get home?" "Yes, honey, I'm trying to get to City B." "City B? I thought you said you needed to go to City A." Yeah, City A, that's what I meant. That's why the cab ride is $40. It's far away." "The cab ride is $40? Yeah, you said you have $40. "I do. I have $40, but the cab ride is $60. Silence. "Are you sure you can't take me to my aunt's house? She lives close by on Street B." "I thought you said she lived on Street A." "No, I meant Street B, but it doesn't matter because she won't give me my money anyway." "You sure you just can't take me to City A?" It was obvious that this woman was utterly full of it, because the details of her story were constantly changing. When we pulled into the Walmart parking lot, she finally got out of my car, only after I got out first, and followed me into the store. I told her before we went to find an ATM I needed to use the restroom. My plan was to call the police from inside a stall, but she followed me into the bathroom, and that's when things got really weird. She grabbed the crook of my arm and whispered into my ear, "If you don't got any money to give me, that's okay, but let me ask you something. Do you want to do it in the stall?" I told her no as forcefully as I could manage, bolted into a stall, and locked the door as fast as I could possibly manage. As soon as I had a barrier between us, I said, "You know, I have some friends at the police department that can probably help you better than I can. I'm just gonna call them and we can figure this out together." Again, at the mention of the cops, she started screaming at me. I just kept reiterating that the police would help her. She snapped at me that she was just going to leave and stormed out of the bathroom. But it wasn't over. I waited to make sure she was really gone. Sure enough, not 60 seconds after she left, she came back into the bathroom and started banging on the stall door. And she said something that scared me more than anything else. "Hey, come back to your car with me. I left my beer in your car." I blatantly tell her that no. I saw her get into my car and she had absolutely nothing with her other than the clothes on her back. After that, she left the bathroom again and didn't come back. I waited a good 5 minutes before exiting the bathroom. I immediately found a manager who called the police for me. Thankfully, I was in a different police jurisdiction from the one I work in because I was mortified at how entirely stupid I had been the whole night and would have died of embarrassment if any of my coworkers had responded. The officer that responded took my statement and advised me to be more careful in the future. He said that sometimes panhandlers turn violent, and that just recently there had been a report of a woman who matched my description assaulting a good Samaritan that had stopped to try to help her. I definitely learned a lesson on stranger danger, and I'm lucky to have come out not harmed. I'm glad my stupidity didn't kill me. This happened a few years ago when I was around 20 or so. I was hanging out with my buddy Matt at my apartment, located in the downtown area of a medium-sized Midwestern city. We were drinking whiskey, watching comedies, playing tunes, etc. He mentions that he has a close friend, Emily, who used to live in my apartment building with her mother. She now lives across the street from me, and he thought it would be a swell idea if we met because apparently we are very similar and I was single at that point in my life. He rings her cell and tells her to come by my place. She arrived at my apartment and I instantly became fond of her. She was hilarious, very pretty, and a musician just like me. She was around 30 or 10 years older than me. My friend Matt was 35. I've always had friends that are much older for some reason. We played songs together and laughed hysterically for hours. Matt decided to go home, leaving us two alone. We chilled for a while longer, ended up making out, and I got all of her contact info before she told me she's going home and that we should meet up soon. Over the next few weeks, we developed a strong relationship, and we hang out almost daily. I would throw some pajamas on and walk across the street and we'd get wasted and watch movies. It was awesome. After arriving home from my 10-day trip to New York City, things got really weird. The day I returned, she asked if she could come over, so I unpacked my stuff and then told her to stop by. She rings the buzzer, takes the elevator 7 floors up to my apartment, and lets herself in. I was talking non-stop about all the awesome things I did and people I met in New York City, and I could immediately tell she didn't want to hear any of it. She would change the subject every time I brought it up, and eventually she said, "Can you stop talking about New York? I really don't care." I was surprised to hear her speak like this. The Emily I had been getting to know was not like this. She was caring and passionate and an amazing person, so I thought. Fast forward to a few nights later. I had just gotten home from a working 12-hour shift and I collapsed in my bed, ready to pass out for the night. It's about 9 p.m. and I get a text from Emily that says, "Hey, what's up?" I don't feel much like replying at that moment. I am too exhausted and our last hangout was too weird for me to comprehend, so I am still trying to decide how to deal with that. I plug my phone into my charger, turn the lights off, and fall asleep. Bang, bang, bang. I wake up to somebody pounding on my door and screaming at the top of their lungs. "Open the door, let me in now." My entire apartment reeks like cigarette smoke. I grab my phone from beside my bed, my heart beating a million miles per hour. 27 missed phone calls, a bunch of text messages, all from Emily. I scan through the text while she's still at the door screaming, trying to break my door down. The most recent text from her is a long one claiming I'm a bad person for not responding to her text earlier, and that she's coming over to beat me up. For not doing so, she still had a key to the building still from when she used to live there. I get out of bed and nearly having a panic attack and try to decide what my next move should be. Should I open the door and calm her? Should I call the police? Should I just ignore her? I decide to open the door. She begins wailing on me, swinging her arms trying to hit me. She was smoking a cigarette and there were 3 cigarette butts on the ground next to her. Smoking indoors was prohibited in my apartment building. She was very obviously on some sort of drug. She kept screaming at me, telling me how awful I am for not responding to her text message, slurring her speech and losing her balance. I was somehow able to calm her down and I took her to the roof of the apartment building, which had a pretty nice little enclosed picnic table area. We sat beside one another. She was quiet now finally. She kept asking me how I could be such a jerk and that I need to explain myself. The look in her eyes was pure evil as she spoke to me in a calm demeanor now. I said to her, "Emily, I don't ever want to speak to you again after tonight. This whole scenario is absolutely insane. You need help. Let me walk you home." I take her home and return to my apartment to attempt sleeping, at which I do not succeed. A couple of days later, I return home from work and there is an envelope taped to my door. I open it and it's a handwritten letter from Emily apologizing and saying that I'm a beautiful human who doesn't deserve an evil person like her in their life. There was a literal candy bar attached to the envelope, one that I had never heard of that she always told me I needed to try. I never spoke to her again. From what Matt tells me, which, by the way, he always knew she was a problematic person, she's a heavy user of crack now and is working as a food runner in a restaurant nearby. This happened on Saturday. My girlfriend, Tess, my puppy, Jack, and I are all getting ready for a road trip. We're planning on meeting some friends at their house and then starting the trip from there. On our way to their house around 11 a.m., a white car with all tinted windows cuts us off and brake checks us close enough that I had to slam the brakes and swerve to avoid an accident. In the immediate fury, I honked and flipped the driver off. I wish I hadn't done this. Immediately, the driver rolls down his window and waves his hand over. He slows down to go back to the other lane so that our cars are parallel to one another. The driver is gesturing wildly and yelling at us while we continue driving down the avenue. I proceed to make gestures to calm down and then try to ignore him and continue driving. He continues driving next to us. Eventually, I try speeding up and he revs in front of me and tries brake checking me again. At this point, I swerve to the other lane and he again slows down to match my vehicle's speed. He is still gesturing and screaming while I try to ignore him. Suddenly, he reaches in his lap and I notice he is holding a glass bottle. He throws it and it shatters at the side of my vehicle. Tess is hysterical at this point and the pup had hidden under the passenger seat. I go into adrenaline mode and try turning into different streets as the chase ensues. He is following close behind when he throws another glass bottle that shatters against my back window. I tell Tess to call the police as we speed down a 2-lane street and up a hill. She calls 911 as I come to a stop at the light at the top of the hill. The guy chasing us slows down to a stop behind us. Suddenly, he hops out of his vehicle, and in my rearview mirror I see him reach back into his car and grab something and puts it into his shorts. He begins walking towards the side of my car as the car in front of me drives away. I noped out of there, slammed the gas, and turned into the next avenue. Within a minute, he has caught back up to us as I am now on speaker with 911 explaining the situation and giving them the details of his car and appearance. Tess is crying as we speed down a busy avenue, weaving in between cars at 20 above the speed limit. I'm updating the 911 lady with where we are and she tells me to drive to the station. At the next red light he yells out audibly, "Do we have a problem? Don't flip me off." I'm trying to gesture that we do not have any problem. He's still trying to get me to get out of the car. The light is still red and he again hops out of his vehicle. I again floor it through the red and he continues chasing as I make way toward the police station. We're now accelerating and brake checking each other as he tries to drive off the road. I make gestures that he should continue following, hoping to get him to the station. About a block from the police, we get stuck in a busy intersection. There are many cars around as he again walks up to my car. This time I'm boxed in and Tess is panicking. I'm looking for any escape options to no avail. The drivers around us notice and many put their windows up and lock their doors. He comes right up to my window, slaps it with his palm and asks one more time, "Is there a problem?" I again say no. The 911 lady tells me to not engage over the phone speaker. He says good. He gets back into his car and then speeds away. 20 minutes into this horrible car chase experience, we end up meeting with the cops and they say that there was nothing they could do, even though I updated them with more details of his direction and where he was last. We calmed down and then we continued our road trip. So a 20-year-old female, lived in a shady apartment complex in an otherwise rich, suburban area for 3 years. This story is about a neighbor that I'll call Bob. A little backstory: me, 18 years old at the time, and my then 16-year-old sister used to babysit all the neighborhood kids. These kids considered us their friends, and it got to where they seemed to have a radar of when me and my sister went outside. They'd come out and talk to us, and we let them ride our skateboards and such in the parking lot. The kids were ages 8 to 13. So one day we were outside with them and we were joined by a stranger. He stood between us and our car, towering over us. He introduced himself and asked us to sign a petition he made up. We did, just being friendly. Then he asked us how old we were. I thought maybe he was a fellow teenager that looked older or that he was just awkward. So I told him I was 18, and the very next question was if I wanted to go out with him. In front of my mom and the other kid's mom, I awkwardly declined, but he continued talking about how he thought me and my sister were in middle school. Also, he was 28. Eventually, he wandered away to ask someone else to sign his petition. A few days later, he knocked at our door after asking neighbor for the address. He had a bag of what he said was chicken and wanted us to go eat it with him at the park. We declined because we both had schoolwork to do. He walked away and he was mumbling about how antisocial everyone was. Later, we look out our window and see him playing baseball with 2 girls. He kept physically moving their arms to different positions even though they shrugged away from him. Next day, one of the kids runs up to me. I'll call her Maddie. She's 8. She's got a new pair of Heelys and wanted help with them. I was holding her hand and guiding her along when Bob appears and says he can help better. Maddie says no, but he insists. He pushed me aside and reaches for Maddie, holding her tightly around the upper chest area. Her grandma was there too and flips out. He wanders away. The next day, Maddie's freaking out, saying Bob was just sitting on her porch when she left for school that morning. Her parents found out, and as they walked outside he let himself in, and they said he went to their kitchen to make orange chicken. We later found out another neighbor had a similar story. Another time, we were helping a family move. They have a 2-year-old son. The garages are in a triangle shaped to the road, almost a roundabout. There's a flat patch of grass behind them. Well, here comes Bob to help us. He criticized the way we packed things and didn't help until our neighbor politely asked him to leave. Well, he left the garage, but instead of leaving, he asked the 2-year-old if he wanted to play. The kid said no, and it made him mad. He picked up the kid to play, and the kid slapped him. He asked the kid if he wanted to go behind the garages to play ball, so I go with him and guide the kid to his mom. The climax of the story is when me and my sister went on a walk with our 17-year-old friend and her other friend. Maddie found us and wanted to come along, so we are starting our walk when Bob comes out. He sees our friend and asks how old she is and how much she weighs because she's so skinny. He asks where we're going. My friend tells him we're going for ice cream on a girls trip. We didn't ask her to say that. He's like, "Oh man," and stomps away. We continue our walk, but halfway through we have a weird feeling. I look behind us and Bob is running towards us. He yells at us for hiding from him while also telling Maddie how pretty she is. An older neighbor sees this and asks him what's going on. He tells them that we're being mean and he needs to go write a song about us. He leaves, but we see him sitting at the park. Well, he saw us and again comes running. We stop and he asks which one of us is over 18. Maddie's dad is here at this point and tells him we aren't interested in him. He explodes, telling the dad to screw himself and that he's so rude. Maddie is crying, and the neighbor who saw us before came to check on us since he saw Bob running. Bob goes inside, muttering to himself. For weeks we don't see him. A single dad and his 5-year-old daughter move in, and we are introducing ourselves to them. My mom kind of tips him off that there's someone in their building who is a little off, especially around Maddie. The dad says he's seen someone like that giving kids candy at the pool when the kids looked uncomfortable. Well, here comes Bob, as if on cue. He immediately tells the girl in front of her dad that she looks like a movie star and that she's so pretty. He asks to play with her, but the dad says no and they go inside. Turns out they're next door neighbors. We still didn't see him much, but other neighbors were telling us stories about him. There's a woman who's alone most of the day with her 2 kids under 5 who told us he watches her when she goes to and from her car. Also, Maddie's parent continued to see him watching her. Then one day we're again babysitting and here he comes. Only this time he's swinging nunchucks. Maddie screams and hides in our car. Bob strolls over with his nunchucks and starts talking to us all casual. Then his head cranes to look into the car and he says, "Where's Maddie?" We told him she wasn't here and he walked away. By then, most of the kids were afraid to go outside when they saw him. He had a habit of wandering around the complex. We could tell by his height and lanky gait. A few times we'd see Bob with his dad. Those times, neither of them glanced at us. Then one day he just stopped showing up. We'd see his dad and brother come in and out all the time, but never him. We only saw him again a year later, and it was only for one day near Christmas, and then he disappeared again. So I don't know what happened to him, but it was just one of our weird experiences with neighbors in the 3 years living there. On Friday afternoon, I got a call from my friend named Sarah asking if I wanted to meet her and another friend named Lisa at Dunkin' Donuts as we hadn't seen one another in a while. Dunkin' Donuts is a 15-minute walk from my house, so I decided I would walk. Besides, the weather was fine. I got to Dunkin' Donuts and found where Sarah and Lisa were sat, so I went to join them. As we were chatting, I noticed that my sister, Alina, was sat at a table in the corner of the room with her friend, Jess. For some context, my sister and her friend are both 18 years old. My sister still lives with my parents, whereas I live alone. I excused myself from the table and went over to Alina and Jess's table. They were sat at a table with 3 seats, so I went to sit down and said hey. They both jumped a little bit, but then looked more relieved than anything to see me. Immediately, Alina whispered to me, "Don't look now, but the guy in the blue shirt, I think he's following Jess and I." I glanced over and saw the middle-aged man sat at a table facing away from us. He's passed our table a good 5 times in the past 20 minutes to go to the bathroom, but he walks slower as he passes us, she continued. I told them that they were most likely being paranoid and that there was nothing to worry about, but for their peace of mind, I offered to leave with them so they wouldn't feel as worried. I walked back over to my table and explained the situation to Sarah and Lisa. Both of them laughed it off and assumed my sister to be paranoid. Literally about a minute later, I saw the man get up from his seat and walk towards the bathroom. My eyes followed him and sure enough, he walked extremely slow past Alina and Jess. In fact, it was almost comical how obviously slow he became. Both Alina and Jess looked in my direction and I nodded to show that I had seen him walk slower. About 5 minutes later, I went into the toilets. On my way, I passed Alina and Jess and told them I was ready to leave whenever they were. They both agreed that they were ready to leave now. I told them that I was just going to go to the bathroom and that we could leave after I had done my business. Alina had come in her car, so she was going to give me a lift back. I went into the toilet stall, did said business, washed my hands. I was walking down the corridor back into the main eating area when Alina and Jess rushed into the corridor. I asked them what's up and they explained that another man had joined the strange creeper men and that the men were both pointing and staring at them, so they rightfully felt unsafe. We walked back into the eating area. I put my money on our table and explained to Lisa and Sarah that I was taking off and I would explain what was going on when I got home. We all got into Alina's car and left the creeps in the car's rearview mirror. After a 2-minute drive, we reached my house. Just then I remembered that I had been meaning to return something I had borrowed from my mother, so I asked if Alina could drive me to my parents' house as she was going there anyway. I jumped at the car to get what I needed when my phone rang. It was Alina. She explained that a car had driven past and had pulled into a driveway. She said the driver of the vehicle was the creep from Dunkin' Donuts. I looked out of my window and sure enough, there was a car which didn't belong to the owner of the house parked on their driveway. I got the girls into my house and locked the door. I instructed Alina to take a photo of the car and its license plate, and I told Jess to call 911 as she gave the operator more information than what I could. Alina took the photos and we sort of gathered around Jess as she was speaking to the operator. She had finished telling the story and I heard the operator assure us that the police would be at my house soon. A few minutes passed and there was a loud knock at the front door followed by a loud voice shouting, "It's the police." We all did a sigh of relief as I went to open the door. Jess told the operator that the police were here and she hung up. I was in the process of unlocking the door when I thought to look through the spy hole at the top of the door. I peered through and it wasn't a police officer, it was the same guy. I froze in fear and I didn't know what to say. We didn't call the police. I managed to shout back to the man through the door. Elena and Jess were both confused as to why I said this. "We had a call, sir." The man shouted back, "You have the wrong address." I yelled back and informed the girls that it was the creep at the door and not a police officer. Both were rightfully shocked and extremely scared, as was I. I was about to tell Jess to call the police again until I heard the sirens. "Sir, you have to let me in." The man shouted again. This time I didn't answer. He was pounding on the door. His commands for me to let him in turned into begging and pleading. I heard the police car pull up and some commotion outside. An actual police officer knocked on the door and I let him in. Yes, I checked the spy hole first. The police officer took the man into custody while another police officer took Alina and Jess into the dining room for some brief questioning. I called my parents and Jess called hers. Both were here extremely quickly once we told them what had happened. The man was found with a kitchen knife on his person and some other weapons in his car. Who knows what could have happened if I hadn't looked through the spy hole first. Both my sister and her friend are fine, just shaken up after the whole incident. Back when I was 17 or 19, I worked at a small local bakery. There were less than 15 employees spread across all the night and day shifts, so we only had a few people working during the day. One of these people was Dave, the delivery driver. Dave immediately gave me an off vibe. He was in his mid-50s and way too friendly to a teenage girl, but the boss told me straight up that yes, he could be annoying, but no one worked harder than he did, so just ignore his antics. When I signed the paperwork, they never asked me to submit to a background check. In hindsight, that should have been red flag number 2. Over the course of the year or so that I worked with Dave, I tried very hard to ignore him. He was rarely outright creepy, but he was always just a bit too friendly. He would stick around long after his shift was over to talk to me and the other pastry chef on shift. He always wanted to lick the bowl after I made Rice Krispie treats. He would always stand in front of the racks of equipment or ingredients, just enough that sometimes my hand would brush him while reaching for something. He always stood just a little too close. He was constantly asking me about my life, what I liked, what I did for fun, if I had a boyfriend. Almost daily, he would tell me how a nice girl like me should have a boyfriend, how maybe a boyfriend would be good for me. I let this slide because sometimes older people can say things that were meant differently in their time. Then it was concert invites. Every other week he had tickets to one concert or another. Once he figured out my genre of music, it was almost exclusively tickets to bands I desperately wanted to see. But I also knew I should not go anywhere with him. I don't like to associate with coworkers outside of work anyway, and I had seen way too many red flags about Dave to trust him for even a second. My birthday came. He brought me a t-shirt. It was 2 sizes too small. He told me to try it on. I said no. He told me to try it on after work and text him a photo. He gave me his number. He asked for mine. I said no. He asked for the other pastry chef for my number. She had my back and refused as well. He also brought me 2 tickets to a band I'd been wanting to see. VIP section, 21+-year-old only. He said he could get me in, but I had to go with him and him alone. I refused. He told me he could get me booze. I declined. For months and months this continued. I brought it up to one of my bosses, but they laughed it off as classic Dave. When he wanted a hug on his birthday and hugged me without my consent. That's Dave for you. Offering to get me booze or pot? Ah, Dave, you scamp. When he pulled up his shirt and showed me his abdominal scar from a snowboarding accident, well, that's just Dave. No respect for boundaries, but a good worker. I seriously considered having one of my male friends come in under the guise of being my boyfriend just to placate Dave. I was repulsed by him, but he hadn't really done anything to classify himself as a predator. Besides asking for my number, he had never tried to harass me outside of work hours. And besides the odd hug or two that I was too afraid/shy to refuse, he hadn't gotten super physical. Then one day, Dave was gone. His name disappeared from the employee roster. My boss asked to see me in the office. She informed me that Dave was no longer employed at their business. Dave had been fired. Dave was fired because Dave was a convicted offender. Davey here had 2 counts of assault and 1 count of kidnapping a minor from the mid-90s, about the time I was born actually. They had never background checked him, and when they contacted a friend at the police department, they found out that Dave had been lying on lots of paperwork, hiding the fact that he was a convicted felon and not notifying anyone when he moved. Once they brought this information to the police department's attention, they had a few more charges to add. They found out because apparently he had been stalking and harassing one of the clients he delivered to, showing up at her home when he should not have known where she lived. After his termination, Dave showed up to work one day. He had a weapon, but I never found out what he had. They told him to leave or the police would be called. He ended up leaving in handcuffs. I am so thankful I wasn't there that day. Another little tidbit, the police officer my bosses knew had been in the PD for a while and knew one of the officers who had arrested Dave in the 90s. That abdominal scar was from a run-in with the cops and he got injured trying to climb over a fence. That was a few years ago, but sometimes I still think about how badly things could have gotten had I gone to even one of those concerts with him. This happened when I was a bartender about 4 years ago, but I think about it often and has changed the way I operate throughout life. I now refuse to go to any store alone after midnight. For the story's sake, I will tell you that I was 25 and a blonde at the time. On a busy Friday night, I was bartending with the bar manager and he had noticed that they were very low on some bar necessities after the dinner rush. Lemons, limes, bitters, that kind of thing. So I was sent out to go to a 24-hour grocery store down the road to pick up the odds and ends that we would require to get us through the weekend. I picked up everything that was asked for me without trouble at the store, until I got to the liquor aisle. There were two country-looking guys that were probably around my age in the aisle, and they were staring at me and whispering to each other in a way that made me uncomfortable, as I assumed they were making comments about me. All pretty innocent so far. Before they could approach me, I grabbed what I needed very quickly and power walked to the self-checkout. I really booked it out of there because when you're a bartender, it's kind of like you are on stage and are required to be charming and interact with people that you otherwise absolutely wouldn't be able to tolerate unless you're getting paid to, thus why I am not a bartender anymore. I get to the self-checkout and the two guys are on me. I'm scanning my stuff and they use the scanning station next to me. I get a better look at them now that they are right next to me. One is taller, muscular, and average looking. The other is shorter and more plump. They both looked dirty and their eyes were completely bloodshot, not sure if they were high on something or had already been drinking for a while. They continued to stare at me and our eyes awkwardly met, so I did just a polite smile to them. The taller one starts trying to talk to me. Hey, looks like you're ready to party, huh? I replied with something like, yeah, something like that. It's not for me though. They walk closer to me and ignore their responsibility to scan their items. Oh, must be for your boyfriend, huh? I flash a polite smile again and roll my eyes slightly, like this is your hint that I'm not interested. The taller one continues to try to talk to me. You could come hang out with us tonight. We could show you a real good time if you know what I mean. I reply with, no thanks, I'm good. I have plans already. Well, the tall one starts to get upset that his moves aren't working like he hoped and starts using a more threatening tone and moves very close to me, like 2 inches away, but I ignore him, staying focused on the scanner. I don't think he had showered in a few days by the smell of him. He gets a little louder and says, I see how it is. You probably only screw doctors and rich men like that. You think you're too good for us. We can show you that you aren't. We can teach you a lesson. Now, I'm not sure in what context he meant, but it definitely wasn't good. Still not looking at him, I turn away so my body is blocking his view of my purse, which I set on the scanner to grab my 4-inch pocket knife out and slide it up my jacket sleeve in case I need to protect myself, acting like I am searching for my wallet. I do this, however, in view of the self-scan worker standing at her podium and look at her with wide eyes trying to communicate that I do not feel safe and I might need help. I turn back to the machine and slide my credit card to pay, while the creepy and hostile guys are practically standing on top of me. The machine malfunctions and starts beeping. The lady worker comes over immediately, and the guys standing next to me change their expressions from, I am planning to torture you for a couple of days and toss your body in a creek, to, just your friendly good old country boys making polite conversation over here. They actually try to act like I knew them and we were friends so the worker wouldn't be alerted to their ill intentions. They tried joking with the worker saying I was stealing something, and that's why the machine went off. The worker was definitely not buying it. She was a 6+ foot tall woman with some muscle on her, by the way. I wouldn't mess with her on my best day. Anyways, she presses a few buttons on the screen, shooting the guys a very unimpressed look when they were trying to act charming, and cancels the order completely. She turns to me and says, I am sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. This machine seems to not be working correctly. Why don't you gather your things and I will bring you up at an actual register. She puts her hand on my back and gives me a wide-eyed look, like I gave her a minute earlier, letting me know that she sees I am in danger. I pick up my things to follow her to a register that is near the security office. The guys linger around the self-scan, still glaring at me, and eventually complete their purchase, but stand at the exit assuming they are waiting for me. I felt like I would be walking to my death if I made my exit in that moment. The worker keeps a close eye on the guys and scans my items. As she's scanning, she tells me that there wasn't really anything wrong with the machine I was using. It just misread my credit card. She said, I had a bad feeling about those guys from the moment they walked in, and I then saw them getting aggressive towards you. I already rang security to be ready to walk out to the parking lot and make sure you left safely when you were ready to leave. Then I saw you take that knife out and put it up your sleeve, getting ready to protect yourself. As much as I'd like to see you show them they picked the wrong chick to mess with, I'm glad I was able to pull you aside and make sure you are safe. I see them waiting by the door for you. I'll just keep pressing buttons on the screen and act like I'm having trouble with your order until they give up and go outside. Our security officer and I are both still going to escort you to your vehicle when you leave. I thought to myself, this woman seriously deserves a raise. I thanked her over and over again and told her what they said to me, and I was getting afraid because I don't know what these guys are capable of. As I'm talking to her, my bar manager calls me to see what's taking so long. I explained what was happening and he was obviously very concerned and ready to come up there himself. By the time I hang up, the guys had given up and walked out to the parking lot. The worker said to give it another few minutes because she had a feeling they may still be in the parking lot waiting for me to walk out and see which vehicle was mine so they could follow me. My instant thought was, no way, they have to be gone by now. I was wrong. The worker and security guard escort me out, and as it was after midnight, you can imagine how empty the parking lot was. Towards the back of the lot, there sat an old big pickup truck running with the lights on pointed towards the store. It was a huge parking lot, and it wouldn't have made sense for them to initially park like that, so I'm assuming they moved the truck to sit that way so they had a full view of when I exited the store to go to my vehicle. It was like being stalked by very hungry lions. When I unlocked my car and they saw that me, the worker, and the guard were looking directly at them and that I wasn't getting in my car until we watched them leave, they then peeled out of the parking lot. I mean, they seriously did a burnout to establish that they were pissed and trying to intimidate us or something. I thanked the worker and the guard over and over again, as I am certain they had just saved my life, or at least saved me from having to live with whatever those guys were planning on doing to me. I did write a long letter to the store manager and to their corporate location describing how their employees protected me and how grateful I was. I really hope that earned her a promotion, bonus, or raise. She didn't know me at all and was ready to protect me, which really isn't her job, but she did it anyways. Needless to say, I do not go late night shopping by myself anymore. Never will again. This is my brother's girlfriend's story. She doesn't have a Reddit account, but I've told her about this subreddit and she wanted to share her story because it's creepy, but also a good lesson to learn from. I go to a school in a big city that is one of the least safe cities in the US. I chose this school for nursing and definitely not for the location. I live in a row house off the campus with 4 other girls. Cheaper and nicer than dorms, or so we thought. I guess you get what you pay for. We're all sophomores in college. As you would guess, we go out and drink, come back to do things we don't remember. We had just started our rent in August. 3 floors, plus a basement which was padlocked by the owners. Understandable, we would definitely have parties down there to avoid immediate cleanup. The house was great, amazing location to the school and work. I am a CNA who works odd hours, important for later. It was not expensive, and in good condition. I had never lived with that many people before, just one roommate, so before we definitely knew if one of us had misplaced or changed something. I started to notice my snacks were either half gone or completely gone. I was getting annoyed, but a house with many people, it's too much work to go and figure out who ate what, so I ignored it. Slowly, we started making comments about someone eating our food, but passive aggressively. We all just let it go because none of us want a whole house fight. I work until about 11 in the NICU. I get home at about 11:30 mostly on weeknights. I started to notice pants left out or snack wrappers around. I thought it was odd cause none of my roommates had done that before, but just thought, oh, they probably drank a bottle of wine then went to bed and forgot all about this. Again, my roommates started making comments. This time we started to ask because it was getting annoying that all of our food would disappear and things being left out. I knew it was one of them, but no one wants to admit that they ate someone else's snacks in college. We chalked it up to the girl who always smokes and eats her weight in food. She swore it wasn't her. This went on for about 2 months. It got more obvious that someone was clearly taking everyone's food. It definitely had to be the girl that always smokes. I see her eat her whole snack pantry in a night. Come to find out it was not her. One night at work, I was about to get off, but a situation happened and I ended up leaving about 12:30. I took the bus home. I got home and was about to collapse. I wanted to go to bed ASAP. I walked in the front door and the stairs are directly in front of you. You can also see down the side into the kitchen. I walked in and saw someone in the kitchen but was way too tired to say hi. I thought it could end in like a 30-minute conversation about nothing, so I went straight upstairs. When I got to the second floor, I noticed all of my roommates' doors were closed, which always means they're either all in their room for the night or asleep. I got a weird feeling, just something that made it click. I texted our house group chat asking if anyone was in the kitchen. I felt stupid for even asking. 2 responded no, and they said the other 2 had been asleep. I knew it wasn't any of my roommates down there at that moment. I dialed 911 but didn't press call. I crept into my roommate's room across the hall. Thankfully, she didn't have her door locked. I whispered telling her I think someone is in the house. She gave me the widest eyes ever and almost looked like she was going to cry. She didn't suspect anything like I had, but for reference, there was a shooting in the house 2 doors down only weeks earlier by an intruder. She mouthed to make the call. The whole time we were dead silent. We didn't hear anything at all. I was starting to think I was seeing things after such a long day at work and was regretting that I dialed, thinking I'm going to look like an idiot when they show up and I was just exhausted and dreaming. We explained what's going on and they said that they will send someone ASAP. That actually does mean right away since it is a big and dangerous city. The police showed up and I didn't even want to go downstairs, but the operator confirmed it was them, so I did. The police come in and look around. I'm thinking, I look so dumb right now. They ask if there are any other floors. We tell them technically the basement, but it's padlocked, so not really. They check the basement just in case, and well, they were right. A man had been living in the padlocked basement. The lock was pulled off the hinges and just kind of propped against the wall. We never looked at that though. We rarely went out back. The guy had taken a comforter out of the hall closet and had a mattress from somewhere in his clothes. He was the one moving and eating all of our stuff. He would come out in the middle of the night and do it. He started getting more comfortable. I'm not sure if he was drugged out and forgot to clean his tracks or if he didn't really care. Me and my roommates have pretty consistent schedules during the week, probably letting him think that any time after about 12 was good to come out. We never slept with our individual doors locked, and that's what freaks me out the most. He had access to any one of us at any moment, and we had no idea. A little backstory. When I was 19, I lived with my mom in a ranch-style house on a road that backed up to a large field. On the other side was the main highway. About a half mile down from me was a loony farmer, and about a mile on the other side of me was pretty much a drug house. I guess someone used to live there, but it was run down. I will say that they were pretty quiet. Other than those two houses, we were isolated. At the time, I was working full-time and going to school full-time. One of my classes ended at 10:30 p.m. I often wouldn't get home that day of the week until about 11:15ish. I was driving home one night and I noticed some guy walking down the road. He had a yellow shirt and track pants. I remember his outfit because it was weird. It wasn't weird to see people walking down my road because of the whole drug house thing, but I instinctively looked over at him when I drove past. He turned and smiled and waved, which freaked me out. So I speed the half mile home and pull into the driveway, weirded out. I made sure all the doors and windows were secure and then sat on the couch to be a paranoid freak and wait to make sure the dude walked past my house. Except he didn't, and there was another guy with him, dressed in darker clothes. They actually walked up my driveway and started playing around with my car, testing the handles and stuff. In my hurry, I forgot to grab my phone from my car, so I was kind of worried that's what they were after until the guy in yellow started approaching my door. I'm freaking out, so I go and wake my mom up. She's bleary and I'm trying to explain the situation when we both hear the doorknob turn very slowly. Good thing it was deadbolted. She got out of bed, walked to the door, and then yellow shirt knocked. I perched up on the couch so I could get a good look at him and his friend, still in the driveway. The porch light was on because of the sensor. Yeah, my mom said, "You dropped your wallet." I told my mom that I had my wallet, it was in my purse. So she calmly told him that she had her wallet and it was too late to be knocking on people's doors. I remember perfectly what he said next, even though this was about 6 years ago. Okay, I'm not a bad guy, just so you know. We were all pretty still. No one moved, not even the guy at the door. Not even when the porch light went off. Then he tried the handle again. My mom told me to call the cops so she could get the gun, and I told her I didn't have my phone. So she walked to the kitchen to grab hers from the charger. She handed me the phone and walked to the bathroom. I stared out of the window into the backyard. Then she went to her room to grab her Ruger. I was talking to the cops and explaining the situation, all while watching the two guys, explaining that they were two suspicious guys at our door when my mom came back out and said, "One in our backyard too," which explained why she had looked out the bathroom window. She glimpsed him from the kitchen and went to get a more discreet look. My mom walked back over to the door with her gun and loudly said, "If he tries the handle again, I'm just going to open the door and shoot him." I don't know why she said that instead of waiting for the cops to arrive, but the guys took off down the road. I told her and she rushed to the bathroom, where the guy apparently in the backyard saw his friends running down the road and sprinted off too. They were going in the direction of the drug house. The cops searched our house and our yard and went to the drug house, where they found 5 dudes hanging around. One was the yellow shirt guy and I'm assuming his friends were with him. They did get arrested and nothing weird like that ever happened again, but I was on edge for a while. I still make sure the doors are locked at all times every day, even though I live in a much nicer area now. Alright, so that's it. I hope you enjoyed this compilation. Let me know down in the comments below if you want to hear another one of these compilations every once in a while. But as always, have a nice day.